Welcome back to another story on Harryverse X. This time, we're bringing you, what if Loki and Hela found Harry at age 3 and Asgardian siblings taught him to become god of mischief and death. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Boy Between Graves. The rift smelled like burning starlight. Loki noticed it first. He always noticed things first. It was both his gift and his particular curse, a sharp, acrid tang threading through the cold October air of whatever miserable Midgardian countryside they'd wandered into this time. He stopped walking. Hela walked 3 more steps before she realized he'd gone still, then turned to look at him with the expression she reserved for when she suspected he was being dramatic. "Don't," he said, before she could speak. "I haven't said anything." "You were about to say something cutting." She tilted her head, dark hair falling across one shoulder, the pale half of her face catching moonlight. "I was going to ask why you stopped." "That." He pointed upward, though upward wasn't quite right, it was more like inward, or perhaps sideways through the fabric of what was. The sky above the rolling English hills had a quality to it, a shimmer that most eyes would miss entirely. Hela looked up and her expression changed. The cutting remark dissolved. "That's not natural," she said. "No. It's not. It looked like a wound." That was the only word Loki could find for it. The sky had been wounded, torn open by something that had discharged an enormous amount of raw magical energy, and though the tear was already closing, pulling itself shut the way a deep cut eventually knits together, it hadn't finished yet. Threads of light the color of killing curses, green and sick and ancient, still drifted at its edges. Hela was already moving toward it. She had a sense for death the way Loki had a sense for magic, and whatever had happened here, something had died. Something important. He followed. The village was called Godric's Hollow, and it was the kind of quiet English place that looked like it belonged on a postcard: stone walls, old trees, a church with a cemetery attached, cottages set back from narrow lanes. At this hour, past midnight on October the 31st, it should have been fully asleep. Instead, curtains moved in windows as they passed. Someone was crying softly inside a house with a yellow door. A cat sat on a garden wall and watched them with very specific, very human-looking attention, but Loki paid it no mind because the pull was stronger now, leading him down a lane and then sharply left and then, the cottage. Half of it was destroyed. The upper floor had simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way, blasted outward, stone and timber scattered across the garden, a child's mobile hanging from a beam that jutted into open sky. The ground floor still stood, barely. The front door hung open at an angle, hanging by one hinge. Loki could feel the magic rolling off the ruin in waves. Old magic, wild magic, the kind that didn't follow rules because it predated rules. 2 spells had met here, and the meeting had been catastrophic for both of them. One caster was dead. He could see the body, a tall man in a robe, dark-haired and green-eyed, sprawled at the foot of the stairs. The other caster had simply unraveled. He couldn't find a body for the second caster because the second caster had been reduced to something less than a body, scattered into fragments of malice and will that were even now drifting through the hole in the sky above. "Loki," Hela said. She was at the top of the stairs. Or rather, she was at the place where the stairs reached the night sky, standing on the last intact step with the stars behind her and something in her arms. He moved fast. The baby was perhaps 1.5 years old, small even for that, with dark hair that went every direction at once in his father's face, except for the eyes. The eyes were his mother's, though the mother was here too, Loki saw, dead just inside the doorway to what had been a nursery, red hair spread around her like something that had tried to be a crown. The baby was alive, clearly alive, breathing steadily, one small fist clenched in Hela's hair where she'd reached down to pick him up, and on his forehead, still smoking faintly, was a scar in the shape of a lightning bolt. The child looked at Loki with those green eyes, and Loki felt something move in his chest that he had no name for. "He shouldn't be alive," Hela said. She wasn't saying it with cruelty. She was saying it the way she said everything about death, as plain fact, as her native language. Whatever came for him, it was powerful enough to kill an adult wizard and destroy half a building. It hit him directly. I can see where it struck him. And yet, Loki said. And yet. She looked down at the child. The child looked up at her. Then, with the tranquil confidence of the very young, he grabbed her finger. Hela stared at her own hand as though it had done something unexpected. His magic deflected it. More than deflected, it reversed it, sent it back, destroyed the caster. I've never seen a living thing do that. He's a child. He's something else. Loki reached out carefully and let the boy grab his finger too. The child transferred his grip immediately, holding Loki's finger with both hands, and the contact sent a shock up Loki's arm, not painful, more like touching a live current, like standing too close to a lightning strike and feeling the air charge around you. The boy's magic recognized his. Or rather, it reached for his, the way power reached for power. He needs someone, Hela said. He has people. Mortals who will come looking, magical people, from what I can see in this village. They'll take him. Loki said it, and even as he said it he was aware that he was constructing an argument he didn't believe, building the reasonable case because the unreasonable case was already decided somewhere below his conscious thought. They'll make him small, Hela said. She wasn't arguing. She was just observant. You can feel what he is. You know what they'll do with it. He did know. He'd seen it enough times, power like this, wild and strange and unprecedented, and the world's response was always the same. Contain it. Define it. Give it a role that made the powerful comfortable. This boy would be a symbol, a figurehead, a weapon pointed in someone else's chosen direction. His magic would be channeled into acceptable forms. His story would be written before he was old enough to hold a quill. Loki had lived that story. He knew every line of it. Outside, somewhere in the village, a motorcycle engine rumbled, growing closer, not a natural sound for this hour, for this place. And from the other direction, he could feel the approach of something else, someone coming fast through the dark on some kind of enchanted transportation. They were running out of time to not make a decision. Loki looked at the boy. The boy looked at Loki. Then the boy did something extraordinary, he laughed. Clear and bright in the middle of the ruin, with his parents dead 20 feet away and a still smoking scar on his head, this child laughed, and reached for Loki's face with one small hand. Oh, Loki said softly. Well. Obviously. He took the boy from Hela's arms and turned, and between one step and the next they were gone, slipping through the same rift that was still slowly closing above the ruined cottage, stepping through the wound in the sky into the space between worlds, leaving behind nothing but cold air and a question that would haunt a whole world for the next 10 years. Where is Harry Potter? The space between realms was not a comfortable place for mortals, but Harry was not, it turned out, entirely mortal. Loki had suspected this from the first moment of contact, but the suspicion became something closer to certainty as Harry grew, as the years folded past in the peculiar way time moved when you lived partly outside its normal channels. Hela's realm was the first real home Harry knew, and Hell was, well. It was not cheerful. But it was not what people imagined either. Death was quiet there, mostly. The dead did not wail and suffer, they simply were, going about whatever pale version of their living selves they'd carried through the gate. Hela's great hall was vast and drafty and the food was always slightly cold, but it had the best library in any realm Loki had ever visited, which was saying something. Harry learned to walk in Hela's hall, which meant his first steps were taken on black stone floors under cathedral ceilings, with the dead drifting past like tide-borne things and Hela watching him with an expression that on anyone else Loki would have called fond. He fell twice and hauled himself back up both times without crying. Hela approved. She was not, she made clear early on, going to pretend things weren't hard. What she was going to do was teach him how hard things worked. Death isn't the enemy, she told him, when he was perhaps 4 and had found a dead bird in Hela's garden and was crouched over it with that focused, furrow-browed look he got when something confused him. It's a door. Where does it go? Harry asked. Somewhere else. She crouched beside him, her long coat pooling on the ground. That's all death is. Somewhere else. Harry considered this. Is the bird somewhere else now? Yes. Is it happy? A pause. Hela looked at the bird. I don't know. That part isn't my department. Harry looked up at her with those green eyes, the eyes that never failed to do something uncomfortable to Loki's composure when they fixed on him with full attention. Is that okay? Not knowing. It's honest, Hela said. I prefer honest to comfortable. Harry nodded seriously, as though this was a satisfactory answer. Then he picked up the bird very carefully and carried it to a corner of the garden and set it down gently among the black flowers that grew along the wall. When he came back his hands were dirty and he wiped them on his trousers and said, I think it should have somewhere nice, and went back inside. Hela stayed crouched beside the flowers for a long moment after he'd gone. Loki had watched from the doorway. He said nothing. She would have hexed him for saying anything. Loki's education was different, faster, sharper, built on the principle that the best way to learn a thing was to be thrown at it. When Harry was 5, Loki taught him his first illusion. When Harry was 6, they spent 3 months on the Asgardian border, not in the palace, never in the palace while Odin's eye was still present in the world, but in the hills and forests at the realm's edge, and Loki taught Harry to move without being seen, to listen past what was being said for what was meant, to read a room before entering it. When Harry was 7, he conjured fire for the first time. Not because Loki taught him, because he was cold, and he wanted to be warm, and he reached for the feeling of warmth and pushed it outward, and the campfire they'd let go out an hour earlier simply relit, burning twice as hot as before with flames that had an unusual green tinge at their core. Loki had stared at those green flames for a long moment. Loki? Harry had said. Did I do something wrong? No, Loki said, and his voice was very even. No, little shadow. You did something quite extraordinary. It's cold. I just wanted it to be warm. Yes. That's exactly right. He met Harry's eyes. Magic is want, Harry. More than anything else, it is want. The incantations and the gestures and the theory, those are maps. They're useful. But the territory is what you want and what you're willing to do to have it. Harry thought about this. He was 7 and he was very serious about things Loki said, which Loki found both gratifying and occasionally alarming. What if you want something bad? Then the magic will help you have something bad. Magic doesn't have opinions. But you do, Harry said. And Hela does. Yes. We do. So you'll tell me if I want something bad? Loki looked at this 7-year-old with firelight, green firelight, reflected in his enormous green eyes, and felt that nameless chest thing again, that movement that he'd stopped trying to identify and had simply decided to live with. Yes, he said. That is precisely what we're for. Harry nodded and went back to warming his hands. Training with Hela began in earnest when Harry was 8, and it was not gentle. Hela did not believe in gentle. She believed in truth and precision and the understanding that the universe was vast and largely indifferent, and the only useful response to this was to be more interesting than the universe expected. She taught him about death not as a subject of fear but as a subject of study. She took him to the deepest archives in hell and showed him the records, every soul that had passed through her realm, the great tapestry of mortality stretching back to the beginning of things. She showed him where magic came from, in the oldest texts, in languages that predated the civilizations that had invented the scripts they were written in. She showed him that his particular magic, the wild, wandless, green fire magic that hummed at his core, was not simply wizard magic. It was something older. Something that had been sitting in the Potter bloodline for generations, slowly building pressure, waiting for a child who was a perfect enough vessel to finally overflow. You are a convergence point, she told him. Your mother's sacrificial magic. Your father's bloodline, which carries traces of something very old. The curse that struck you and failed, that failure left a mark that is itself a kind of power. You are three things that should not have occupied the same person. The fact that you're alive and coherent is either a miracle or a very good joke. Loki says those are the same thing, Harry said. The corner of Hela's mouth moved. On her, that was practically a grin. Loki is occasionally correct. Don't tell him I said that. He'll already know. He always knows. Yes, she said. That is one of his more irritating qualities. He was also, and this was something neither of them had expected, funny. Genuinely, naturally funny in the way that was different from Loki's trained, weaponized wit. Harry's humor was observational, warm, alive with the kind of delight in absurdity that came from having been raised in very strange circumstances and choosing to find them wonderful rather than terrible. He could make Hela laugh, which was something Loki had not managed consistently in several hundred years of trying. He did it without apparent effort, usually by simply saying something completely true at exactly the wrong moment. When he was 9, Loki took him to Midgard for the first time since the night they'd left. Not to England, not yet, but to other places. Japan, Morocco, the deep Amazon, the ice sheets of Antarctica where the world was so clean and white it felt like standing inside a blank page. Harry absorbed it all with enormous eyes and asked questions constantly, good questions, the kind that forced Loki to actually think rather than simply reaching for the nearest ready answer. He wanted to know everything. That was the thing about Harry, the fundamental quality that made teaching him different from anything Loki had experienced before. Most students, even brilliant ones, had limits to their curiosity. Walls where interest ran out and the mind said enough, this is sufficient. Harry didn't have those walls. He wanted to know how everything worked and why it worked that way and what it would look like if it worked differently and whether there was a version of it that nobody had tried yet. Loki recognized this. He'd been like this once, before the world had taught him that curiosity was only valuable when it produced results that pleased the powerful. He made a point of never teaching Harry that lesson. The first time Harry used magic offensively was in Morocco, in a souk in Marrakesh, when a man grabbed Loki's wrist with the evident intention of beginning some kind of altercation over a price negotiation that Loki had been deliberately provoking for entertainment value. Before Loki could respond, Harry, 9 years old, slight, wearing a green shirt and an expression of perfect calm, lifted one hand and the man flew backward 15 feet, landed on a pile of carpets, and stayed there, blinking. The souk went quiet. Harry looked at his own hand. Then at Loki. I didn't mean to do that quite so hard, he said. He's fine, Loki said, assessing the man, who was indeed fine, merely stunned. Possibly improved, actually, that looked like quite a comfortable pile of carpets. Is he going to be angry? Loki looked at the man, who was now staring at Harry with an expression that had moved well past anger into something more like theological revision. I don't think so. No. Harry nodded. Then he looked around at the watching crowd, and rather than shrinking, rather than apologizing, rather than doing what most 9-year-olds might do in the aftermath of accidentally assaulting an adult in a public market, he just looked back. Even. Unafraid. Not aggressive, not arrogant. Just present. His green eyes moved across the faces watching him with the same focused attention he brought to everything. The crowd, for reasons that were probably instinctive, decided they had things to do elsewhere. Loki watched this and thought, there it is. The thing that lived under the warmth and the humor and the relentless curiosity. Something older than all of it. Something the killing curse had tried to extinguish and had instead, somehow, concentrated. Come on, Harry said, turning away, already moving toward the next stall. You promised me pastry. I absolutely did not promise you pastry. You implied pastry. Same thing. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Thursday morning in late July, a month before Harry's 11th birthday, delivered not to any fixed address but finding them the way Hogwarts letters apparently always found their intended recipients, with the kind of magical insistence that recognized person rather than place. They were in a rented cottage on the west coast of Ireland at the time. Loki had taken a mild interest in the local standing stones and Harry had taken a more intense interest in the seals that gathered on the rocks below the cliff, spending 3 mornings in a row just sitting above them and watching, occasionally throwing them fish, having what appeared to be a non-verbal conversation with an elderly bull seal that had a chip out of his left flipper. The owl came in through the open window while Harry was outside and dropped a thick parchment envelope on the kitchen table with the air of something that had been looking for this address specifically, then sat on the windowsill and waited. When Harry came in, trailing damp sand and smelling of sea air, he stopped and looked at the letter and then at the owl. "For me," he said. The owl blinked. Harry picked up the letter. Turned it over. "Read the seal." Then he went to the back door and shouted, "Loki." Loki appeared from the direction of the stones, his coat blowing in the Atlantic wind. "What?" Harry held up the letter. Loki came inside. "Read the envelope." Turned it over. Looked at the seal. Then he smiled, and it was the particular smile he only deployed when something amused him in a way he hadn't predicted. "Well," he said. "It was only a matter of time. Hela said they'd send one. Hela says a great many things that turn out to be correct. It's one of her more annoying qualities." Harry sat down at the kitchen table and opened the letter with none of the trembling awe that the moment probably called for. He opened it the way he opened everything, with straightforward attention, unfolding the parchment and reading it through once without comment. Then he set it down flat and read it again. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the letterhead, then the usual contents. Your acceptance. The term begins on September 1st. The list of required materials. The instruction about the train. What do you want to do? Loki asked. He always asked this. He had made a point of always asking this, because the alternative was deciding for Harry, and he'd watched Odin decide for everyone around him his entire life and he knew exactly where that road went. Harry thought about it. Outside, a wave broke against the cliff. The owl shuffled on the windowsill. "I want to go," Harry said. "I've been reading about it. The library, the classrooms, it's magic from a specific tradition, which is different from what you've taught me, and I want to understand the difference." "There will be people there who know your name," Loki said. "I know. They'll have ideas about who you are. They'll be wrong." Harry looked up, and there was nothing defensive in his face, nothing anxious. Just certainty, the quiet, unshakable kind. "That doesn't mean they'll be dangerous. Some of them will be dangerous." Harry smiled. It was Loki's own smile, or something closely related to it, slightly tilted, with knowledge behind it. "I've been trained by the god of mischief and the goddess of death. What, exactly, do you think they're going to do to me?" Loki had no answer to this that wasn't fundamentally a concession that Harry was right. He gave the owl a strip of dried meat from the counter, which it accepted with great dignity, and turned back to the letter. "We'll need to visit Diagon Alley," he said. "I know." Harry was already reading the supply list. "It's in London." "I know where Diagon Alley is, Loki. You taught me to read. I used the ability. And I am constantly amazed that a child as irritating as you came from people as decent as the Potters." Harry grinned. "You love it." Loki picked up the letter, pretending to study it. "Marginally," he said. The grin widened. Harry went back to his list. They told Hela that evening, the way they always told Hela things, through the small Bifrost fragment that Loki had spent 3 years constructing from components no one was supposed to be able to obtain, a hand-sized piece of mechanism that opened a communication channel into Hell when activated. The image it projected was small and slightly blue-shifted, like Hela was standing inside a cold flame, but it was clear enough to convey expression, which was often the important part. She listened without interrupting while Harry explained about the letter. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Yes," Harry said. "You'll be around other children your age for the first time. I've been around children before. Morocco, the Japanese coast, for an extended period. Living with them. Taking classes with them. I know. Harry thought about it honestly, which was what Hela had always taught him: when you answer a serious question, answer it seriously. I'm not worried about them. I'm curious about them. Another silence. Then, good, Hela said. Worry is a prayer for things you don't want. Curiosity is a tool. I know. You've said that. I'll say it until it's reflexive. Her pale eyes moved from Harry to Loki, and the look she gave him was complex, layered in the way that centuries of complicated sibling relationship produced layers. Watch him. Not as a guardian. As a witness. Will you take him to Diagon Alley? Obviously. Try not to start any incidents. Hela, Loki said, with great dignity, I never start incidents. Harry laughed. Hela looked at him. What? Nothing, Harry said, and was absolutely still laughing, trying to suppress it. Nothing at all. The corner of Hela's mouth moved again. Come to hell before September 1st, she said. I have things for you. What things? You'll see. The image of her flickered once. Don't be soft out there, Harry. Never. Good. And she was gone, the communication closing, the small device cooling in Loki's palm. Harry was quiet for a moment, looking at the space where her image had been. She's worried, he said. She'd deny it vigorously. I know. She's still worried. He paused. So are you. Loki set the device down on the table. Outside, the Atlantic was going dark, the last light bleeding out of the western sky in long streaks of orange. I am appropriately concerned, he said carefully. That's what worried sounds like when you say it. Harry stood up from the table and stretched, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked exactly like what he was, an almost 11-year-old boy in a coastal cottage, utterly ordinary. Then he turned and looked at Loki, and the ordinariness dissolved, because those eyes were never ordinary. It'll be fine, he said. I promise. You don't know that. I know me, Harry said simply. That's the same thing. He went to bed. Loki sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward, listening to the sea, and thought about green eyes in the ruins of a cottage, and a baby who had laughed in the middle of catastrophe. The owl, which had apparently decided to stay, watched him from the windowsill. Yes, Loki said to it. I know. The owl ruffled its feathers and looked away, very pointedly, which felt like a comment. He thought about Godric's hollow. About what he'd felt when he'd touched Harry's magic for the first time, that crackling, live-current recognition. He thought about what Hela had said, that night, standing on the ruined stairs with a baby in her arms. They'll make him small. He thought about Harry at 9, standing in a Moroccan souk after moving an adult man 15 feet with a gesture, looking at the watching crowd with those steady eyes, unafraid and unashamed. Not this one, he thought. Not this one. He blew out the candle and went to stand in the door, looking out at the dark Atlantic, and somewhere beyond it a world that was about to be very surprised. Chapter 2, The Letter and the Laughing God. Diagon Alley on a Tuesday morning in August smelled like candle wax, old parchment, and something that might have been dragon, not a full dragon, more like the suggestion of one, the olfactory memory of something enormous having passed through recently. Harry noticed it the moment they stepped through the leaky cauldron and out into the alley proper, and he stopped walking just long enough to take it in. The alley was busier than he'd expected. Summer was ending, which meant Hogwarts families everywhere, children dragging parents toward shop windows, parents dragging children away from the same windows, owls in cages stacked outside elops, cauldrons in graduated sizes outside the potion supply shop, a cart selling something deep-fried that smelled extraordinary being pushed by a wizard whose hat was approximately 3 feet tall and listing significantly to the left. Harry looked at all of it with his hands in his pockets and a calm, interested expression, the way he looked at everything. Loki stood beside him in muggle clothes, dark coat, no horns, nothing obviously divine, and surveyed the alley with the practiced eye of someone assessing a new theater before deciding where to stand for maximum effect. "Well," Harry said. "It's something, isn't it?" "It's something," Loki agreed. A child nearby pointed at Harry. Her mother pulled her hand down without looking. Two wizards in robes passed them and one of them glanced at Harry's forehead, where the scar was plainly visible, and did an immediate double-take so severe he walked into a barrel of newts. The barrel owner shouted. The newts scattered. Harry watched this with mild interest. "Is it going to be like that everywhere?" he asked. "Very probably," Loki said. "Right." Harry adjusted the strap of his bag. "Gringotts first. You said there's an account. Your family had accounts. Plural." Loki began walking. Harry fell into step beside him, matching his pace, a habit from years of walking through places that required paying attention. "Your father's family was old, and old families in the magical world tend to accumulate wealth the way rivers accumulate silt. Slowly, then all at once. Have you been in there before?" "Gringotts?" "Once. A long time ago. Fascinating institution. The goblins built it on principles of magical contract law that predate human civilization on this island, and they hold to those principles with a rigidity that is either admirable or terrifying depending on whether you're trying to get money out or keep it in." "You tried to rob it," Harry said. "I was exploring." "You tried to rob it." Loki didn't answer, which was an answer. Harry made the face he made when he filed information away, a slight compression of the lips, not quite a smile. The bank was marble and white and very tall, with goblins at the entrance who looked at Harry the way all goblins apparently looked at everything, which was with the considered, unhurried contempt of creatures who had been doing their jobs since before most of the things in the world had names. One of them, as they walked past, looked at Harry's forehead and then looked at Harry's face, and there was a pause, brief, almost imperceptible, before he returned to his impassive watchfulness. Harry noticed. He noticed everything. Inside was larger than outside, which was either very good architecture or very deliberate magic, and there were more goblins behind the long counter and more goblins moving between the stations and somewhere in the distance a sound like machinery, like something enormous being moved through stone passages far below. Loki approached the counter with the easy confidence of someone who had never in his life felt like he didn't belong somewhere, or if he had decided not to show it. "Harry Potter," he said to the goblin who looked up at them. "Here to access his accounts." The goblin looked at Harry. "Identification?" Harry reached into his pocket and produced a small dark stone engraved with a rune that Hela had given him when he was 6, which she'd said would serve as identification in any of the 9 realms and also in several places that weren't technically realms. He set it on the counter. The goblin picked it up. Turned it over. Its eyes moved between the stone and Harry, and then something interesting happened. The goblin's expression, which had been set in the standard issue professional neutrality of all bank employees everywhere, shifted. Just slightly. Something that in a human face might have been surprise, or reassessment. "One moment," the goblin said, and disappeared through a door behind the counter. Loki looked at Harry. Harry looked back, eyebrows slightly raised. "What did Hela give you, exactly?" Loki said, keeping his voice low. "She said it was a death mark. That everyone who serves death recognizes it. And goblins, apparently serve death, in some capacity." Harry looked at the door the goblin had gone through. "She didn't explain further. She said I'd understand when I needed to. That is extremely Hela." "Yes." The goblin came back with a second goblin, this one older, heavier, with the kind of seniority that announced itself in the way it moved. This one set the stone on the counter between them and looked at Harry with frankly evaluating eyes. "Ragnarok," the goblin said, by way of introduction, or perhaps just information. "Harry," Harry said. "We know who you are." Ragnarok picked up the stone again, turned it in its long fingers. "This mark. Where did you get it?" "It was given to me. By Harry held the goblin's gaze. He had learned a long time ago, from Hela herself, that the moment you looked away from a direct question was the moment you lost ground. By someone with the authority to give it, he said. A pause. Then Ragnarok set the stone down and pushed it back across the counter. Your accounts, it said, have been active since your birth and have gone unaccessed for nearly a decade. There are 3. The Potter family vault, a trust vault established in your name, and a third account. A pause that felt deliberate. The third account predates the other 2 by a considerable period. It is listed under a secondary name. Harry glanced at Loki. Loki looked genuinely curious, which was rare. He usually managed to look like he'd already known things before you told him. What secondary name? Harry asked. Peveril, Ragnarok said. The word landed in the marble hall and seemed to do something to the air around it. Loki was very still. Harry filed the word away with the particular attention he gave things that moved the people around him. I'd like to see all 3 vaults, Harry said. Of course. Ragnarok gestured, and one of the younger goblins appeared. Griphook will take you down. The cart ride was extraordinary. Harry had been in faster things. Loki had introduced him to several forms of transport that made a goblin mine cart look like a garden stroll, but there was something different about hurtling through stone passages under one of the oldest magical institutions in Britain, with torchlight strobing past and the smell of metal and old magic rising from the depths below. Harry sat forward in the cart and watched the tracks ahead and felt something that was almost like anticipation. The Potter Vault was exactly what Loki had described: old money, accumulated slowly, a room full of gold and artifacts and several locked boxes that Harry noted for later examination. The Trust Vault was straightforward. His parents had set it aside for him specifically, and there was a letter inside a sealed envelope that had his name on it in what was presumably his mother's handwriting. He put the envelope in his bag without opening it, which Griphook observed without comment. The third vault required a different passage, deeper, older, the stonework changing from the clean-cut precision of the upper levels to something rougher, as though the passage had been carved rather than built, forced through rock that hadn't wanted to yield. The cart slowed at the entrance to a chamber that had no visible door until Griphook did something with a small key that involved a gesture Harry watched very carefully and stored. Inside was old. Genuinely old, the kind of old that sat in the bones of a place and made the air feel different, thicker, as though each breath contained a history. There were books, dozens of them, on stone shelves, in cases of preservation glass. There were objects Harry couldn't immediately identify. There was a cloak, grey, shimmering, folded on a stone shelf as though someone had left it there meaning to come back and never quite managed it. And there was a stone, dark and small, sitting in the center of the room on a plain pillar. Harry walked straight to the cloak. He didn't know why. He picked it up and it fell through his fingers like water, like it had no intention of being held by the usual physics, and when he threw it over his shoulders it disappeared. He disappeared, completely, cleanly, without even the slight shimmer that Loki's best concealment spells produced. Said Loki, looking at the space where Harry had been. The cloak of invisibility, Griphook said, with the tone of something reciting a memorized fact. One of 3 objects, known as the Deathly Hallows, Harry said, reappearing, pulling the cloak back off his shoulders. Yes. I know what these are. He looked at the stone. Looked at the cloak in his hands. Hela has the third one. She's had it since before recorded history, by her account. Loki stared at him. She told you about the Hallows? She mentioned them once. In the context of what she called things that were made to be mine and ended up elsewhere. Harry set the cloak over his arm. She seemed to find the whole situation more amusing than anything else. He looked at Loki. Is that why you wanted to come to Gringotts specifically? Did you know this was here? A pause. The kind of pause Loki took when he was deciding how much honesty was called for. I suspected, he said. Old families. Ancient bloodlines. The Peverils there were stories. I wanted to know if the stories were grounded. Harry studied him for a moment, then turned back to the vault. He picked up the resurrection stone and turned it in his fingers, once, twice, careful not to turn it 3 times, because Hela had told him enough about it to know better. Then he put it in his coat pocket. Picked up 2 of the books from the shelves. Left the rest. "Right," he said. "I think we're done here." Griphook, who had watched all of this with the particular attention of a creature whose professional life required assessing what people valued, said nothing. But on the way back up through the stone passages, Harry caught the goblin looking at him with something that he recognized from other contexts, something like recalibration. Good, he thought. Let it recalibrate. Flourish and Blots was next, and Harry walked through it the way Loki had taught him to walk through libraries, slowly, systematically, reading spines, noting gaps, understanding the collection's philosophy from its arrangement before opening a single page. The Hogwarts reading list took him perhaps 4 minutes to assemble. The rest of the time he spent pulling additional volumes, things not on the list, things that caught his attention for specific reasons, an advanced charms theory text, a thick and rather battered volume on the history of dark magic that had been shelved in a back corner where it couldn't upset anyone, a slim book on magical creatures of the northern regions of the world that had illustrations that moved with obvious discomfort at being made to illustrate things they found undignified. He brought all of it to the counter. The witch behind the register looked at the stack. "The school list?" she asked, with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd handled thousands of Hogwarts families. "And extras," Harry said. "Quite a few extras." She was already counting, running through the stack. Her eyes landed on the dark magic history book and she paused for just a beat before moving on. "Good summer reading? I like to be prepared." She looked up. Looked at his forehead. Looked at his face. Did a slower version of the same reassessment he'd seen from the goblin, with the same quality of someone revising an assumption. "Right," she said, and rang up the total without further comment. Madame Malkin's was more complicated. He'd known it might be. There were 2 other customers when he walked in, a boy his own age, blonde, with the kind of posture that came from being told since birth that posture was moral, standing on a fitting stool while being measured. Beside him, a tall woman in expensive robes who was probably his mother, and the resemblance was clear enough to confirm it. The boy looked at Harry when he came in with the reflexive assessment of someone raised to categorize people quickly. His eyes went to the scar, went to the second-hand look of Harry's current clothes, went to the bag of books. Then they came back to the scar and stayed. "Hogwarts too?" the boy said. "Yes," Harry said, stepping up onto the next fitting stool as Madame Malkin came at him with measuring tape. "What house do you think you'll be in?" Harry considered this honestly. "I don't know yet. Father says Slytherin is the only house worth being in. Though Ravenclaw isn't too bad." The boy said this with the authority of something repeated enough times to feel like personal opinion. "You'd better not be a Gryffindor." "Why not?" "They're all right, I suppose, if you like that sort of thing. My father says they're mostly people who confuse being loud with being brave." "Your father seems to have opinions about a lot of things," Harry said. A pause. The boy's eyes sharpened. He wasn't unintelligent, Harry could see that, the way he could usually see it in people, the specific quality of attention that meant someone was actually processing rather than just reacting. "Draco Malfoy," the boy said, as though this were relevant data. "Harry Potter," Harry said. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. The kind that started at the stool where Draco Malfoy was standing and expanded outward like a dropped stone in water, reaching the fitting room attendant, reaching Madame Malkin herself, reaching the tall woman by the door who turned her head with the controlled sharpness of someone who'd heard a significant thing and was pretending not to have heard it. Draco Malfoy looked at him. "You're actually Harry Potter." "That's what I just said." "I thought you were." He stopped. Started again. "No one knew where you went after." He gestured vaguely, which Harry understood to mean after the night your parents died and the Dark Lord tried to kill you and you destroyed him instead. People never quite said that directly. I was around, Harry said. Around where? Various places. The measuring tape finished with him. Harry stepped down from the stool. It was good to meet you, he said, and meant it, because Draco Malfoy was interesting, in the way that complicated things were interesting. There was a person inside the posture and the rehearsed opinions, someone actually present and paying attention, and that was more than Harry could say for many people twice his age. Draco watched him leave with the expression of someone who had expected a very different conversation and wasn't sure how they felt about having gotten a better one. Loki was outside, leaning against the wall, eating something on a stick that he'd acquired from an unknown source, looking up and down the alley with the relaxed attention of a predator who was not currently hungry but was keeping its skills sharp. Well, he said. Met a Malfoy, Harry said. How was it? Interesting. He's not stupid. No. The Malfoys rarely are. Mistaken in fundamental ways, but not stupid. He offered Harry a piece of the food on the stick. Harry took it. There's something happening near the end of the alley, he added. Harry looked. A crowd had gathered outside a shop, a new shop, by the look of the fresh paint and the banner, flourish and blots already receding in his memory because the new sign read Borgin and Burke's. No, wait, that was a different direction. This was something else, some kind of event, people clustered around a display of books in vivid green covers with an author signing at a table just visible through the window. Who is it? Harry asked. Gilderoy Lockhart, Loki said, with a particular inflection. I don't know who that is. You will. He's written 7 books about himself, or rather about things he may or may not have actually done but has certainly convinced a significant portion of the public he did. He has very good hair and he knows how to construct a story. A pause. He's a mediocre wizard who has made a career of being seen in proximity to actual events. How do you know? Because I can recognize someone who has made performance into a survival strategy, Loki said, without any particular bitterness. It's a recognizable skill. The difference is whether the performance is backed by anything real. Harry ate the rest of his food on a stick and watched the crowd around Lockhart, the way people leaned toward him, the way he managed the attention like someone conducting an orchestra they'd practiced with for years. He filed Gilderoy Lockhart away under interesting and probably not dangerous, but watch. Wand, Loki said, nodding toward Ollivanders. Right. Harry dropped his stick in a bin and turned. You're not coming in. Loki looked at the shop. Something crossed his face that was hard to read, not quite reluctance, more like the wariness of someone approaching a place that had history. Ollivander and I have a complicated relationship, he said. You tried to get a wand illegally, didn't you? I was exploring his inventory. In the middle of the night. When else do you explore inventories? Harry left him outside. Ollivander's was narrow and dim and smelled of cedar and something electric, like the air before a storm. Mr. Ollivander himself appeared from somewhere at the back in the way that old wand makers apparently appeared, as though he'd been there the whole time and you'd simply failed to notice. He looked at Harry for a long moment. His pale eyes moved to the scar, moved away. Unlike most people, he moved away from the scar quickly, because what he was looking at was not the scar but something else, something he was apparently trying to read by looking in the general direction of Harry's chest. Mr. Potter, he said. I wondered when I'd see you. Here I am, Harry said. Yes. Ollivander tilted his head. I noticed something interesting, before you came in. The shop registered your presence at the end of the alley, which typically happens only when someone with a particular, he paused, searching for the word, affinity for wand lore is nearby. We've had you in range for the past hour. What does that mean? Let's see. He pulled the first wand without any of the formal ceremony Harry had read about. Just reached to a shelf and passed it across. Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather. This wand should know you. Harry took it. Nothing happened, no warmth, no shower of sparks, nothing. He set it on the counter. Ollivander's expression became focused, intent. He tried another. And another. He pulled wands with increasing speed, and the pile on the counter grew, and nothing happened, and something in his face went from focused to fascinated. Interesting, he kept saying, in a way that sounded more like extraordinary. 14 wands in, Harry felt it before Ollivander even finished pulling the box from the shelf. A pull, the same pull he sometimes felt when he was about to do something significant, a sort of leaning toward in his chest. He watched Ollivander open the box. Long, dark, knotted in a way that the others hadn't been, this wand looked almost grown rather than made, as though it had come from a tree that had already decided what it wanted to be before anyone took a knife to it. "You," Ollivander said, with an odd note in his voice. 13 inches. Thestral tail hair core. He looked at Harry. Thestral hair is rare. Most wand makers won't touch it. It answers only to those who have seen death and accepted it rather than fearing it. He was studying Harry's face. "You're very young to qualify." Harry picked up the wand. The warmth was immediate and total, not a trickle, a flood, like stepping from a cold room into sunlight. The air around them shifted, and every wand on the counter rolled slightly toward Harry as though magnetized. The measuring tape on the wall unrolled itself and dangled, the end of it pointing at him. "Yes," Ollivander breathed. Harry turned the wand in his fingers. It felt like something that had been waiting. Not for him specifically, maybe, but for someone who carried what he carried, who'd walked where he'd walked. "Thestral tail hair," he said. "That's unusual." "The wand maker who made this one didn't use it by accident," Ollivander said. He was looking at Harry the way Ragnar had looked at him, with the expression of someone revising a category. This wand was made with particular intention. For someone who lives between two kinds of understanding. He paused. "I made it 40 years ago and it's been waiting since." "What happened to the person it was made for?" "They weren't ready." He folded the box and set it aside. "You are." Harry paid and left, tucking the wand into his inner pocket where it settled as though it had been there always. Loki was still outside. He straightened when Harry came out, looked at him, and whatever he saw made him nod once, the slow, certain nod he reserved for things that confirmed things he'd suspected. "Good," he said. Harry took out the wand and turned it once. A current of dark air moved down the alley, stirring dust and briefly lifting the hats off two nearby wizards, and both of them looked around with the confused expression of people whose hats had just departed without explanation. "Very good," Harry said. The owl was not planned. The owl happened because they passed by Elops and something inside one of the cages went absolutely insane, not screeching, not flapping, but a controlled, intense, focused reaction, a snowy owl hitting the bars of her cage not with panic but with urgency, with the specific energy of something saying you, stop walking. Harry stopped walking. The owl looked at him. Her eyes were orange and entirely too intelligent. "Go on, then," Loki said, with a kind of resigned amusement. The owl came out of the cage and onto Harry's shoulder before the shop owner had finished unlocking it, and proceeded to sit there with the composed satisfaction of something that had made a decision and was pleased with itself. She bit his ear once, gently, as if to establish terms, and then arranged herself comfortably and looked at Loki with an expression of considerable condescension. "Does she have a name?" Harry asked the shopkeeper. "She doesn't answer to anything we've tried. Came in last week, we haven't been able to sell her, she doesn't tolerate handling from anyone." Harry tilted his head toward the owl. The owl tilted her head toward him. A brief silence. "Nix," Harry said. The owl closed her eyes once and opened them. "Satisfied?" "Right," Harry said. Loki paid for the owl with the expression of a man who has made peace with chaos. The last stop wasn't on the Hogwarts list. Harry had seen the sign that morning, Nocturne Alley, 30 yards, and had made a note. Now, with the afternoon getting long and the school shopping largely finished, he looked at Loki and then at the narrow turning. 5 minutes, Harry said. Absolutely not. 10 minutes. Harry, you went in there when you were exploring Ollivander's inventory. That is both a different situation and an accusation I formally deny. Loki looked at the turning. The thing was, Harry could see him looking at it, the same pull he'd felt toward the wand, the same leaning forward in his chest that happened near things worth knowing. 5 minutes, Loki said. We look. We don't buy anything. We don't interact with anyone who smells of dark magic. What does dark magic smell like? Like regret that went bad. Nocturne Alley was dim even in afternoon, the buildings leaning toward each other overhead until the sky was just a gray slit. The shops along it dealt in things that Diagon Alley preferred not to look at directly, cursed objects, dark artifacts, component parts of things that the law considered inadvisable. Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving steadily, cataloging. He wasn't afraid. He'd been in hell. He'd walked the deep passages of Svartalfheim with Loki, he'd sat in the halls of the dead while Hela held court. A dim alley in London full of second-rate dark objects was not his most challenging environment. What he noticed was the people. The shopkeepers watching them from doorways, the figures moving between shops with the practiced invisibility of people who had learned that being seen led to questions. He noticed the quality of attention in the alley, guarded, sharp, with an undercurrent of something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it. He noticed, in the window of a shop called Borgin and Burke's, the Malfoy family, Draco and the woman from the fitting room and a man who could only be Draco's father, lean and fair and carrying a cane with a snake head that Harry was fairly sure wasn't decorative. Draco was saying something that his father was not reacting to with approval. The woman's face was careful and controlled in the way of someone managing a situation they'd not wanted to be in. Harry watched them through the glass for a moment. Draco, perhaps feeling eyes, looked out. Saw Harry. Something complicated moved across his face. Harry nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and moved on. The Malfoys are looking at dark artifacts, he said quietly. The Malfoys are always looking at dark artifacts, Loki said. The family has a long relationship with the kind of power that doesn't ask for signatures. His father knew Voldemort. Half the wizarding world's powerful families knew Voldemort, one way or another. The question is always which half collaborated and which half just looked away. He glanced back at the shop. The Malfoys collaborated. The father's alive and free because he had the good sense to claim coercion when the alternative was Azkaban. Harry thought about Draco Malfoy, who had his father's posture and his mother's careful eyes and something in him that was possibly neither. He's not his father, Harry said. Not yet, Loki said. Whether he becomes him is a choice that nobody's made for him yet. Don't romanticize the family, but don't condemn the boy for the family either. I wasn't romanticizing anything. I was observing. Good. Keep it that way. They left Nocturne Alley as the afternoon darkened toward evening, stepping back into Diagon Alley's relative brightness with bags and books and an owl and one wand that had been waiting 40 years and one stone that could summon the dead and one cloak that could hide the living, and Harry felt something he identified, after a moment of examination, as readiness. Not excitement, exactly. Not nervousness. Just the clean, forward-facing feeling of someone standing at the start of something they had prepared for and were no longer preparing for. Loki looked at him as they walked back toward the leaky cauldron. Ready? Ask me something harder, Harry said. Nyx the owl, riding his shoulder, ruffled her feathers in a way that might have been agreement. Above them, the late August sky was going gold over London, and somewhere to the north, a castle on a Scottish loch was lighting its first torches of the coming year, and it had no idea whatsoever what was coming to study in it. Chapter 3, The Sorting of Storms. Platform 9 3/4 existed in the specific way that good secrets existed, hidden not behind locks but behind the assumption that you wouldn't look. Harry walked through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without breaking stride, Nyx's cage in one hand and his trunk floating behind him on a word, and the platform opened up like a held breath finally released. The Hogwarts Express was red and enormous and breathing steam into the September morning with the patient confidence of something that had been doing this for a very long time and intended to keep doing it. The platform was controlled chaos, families everywhere, owls complaining, a pair of red-headed twins causing what appeared to be a minor explosion near the front of the train that everyone in their immediate vicinity was either fleeing or laughing at depending on their proximity to the smoke. Harry stood at the barrier entrance for exactly 2 seconds, taking it all in, then moved. He loaded his trunk and found a compartment near the middle of the train, not the front, which would fill first, not the back, which was traditional territory for people who wanted to either be very private or very trouble. Middle was good. Middle let you see everything. He'd been settled with a book for perhaps 5 minutes when the compartment door opened and a boy looked in with the expression of someone who'd already checked 4 other compartments and was running out of options. Round-faced, broad, with an expression of generalized anxiety that sat on him like a coat he'd been born wearing. "Is anyone, can I?" He gestured vaguely at the seats. "Yes," Harry said. The boy came in and sat down with the relieved exhale of someone who'd been dreading asking. He had a toad in his hands, which he was holding with the grip of someone who'd already lost it once today. "I'm Neville," he said. "Neville Longbottom. I've lost my toad 3 times since we left London. Harry Potter." He watched Neville process this, the familiar sequence, the scar check, the recalibration. The toad's name? Trevor. Neville looked at the toad. Trevor looked back with the profound indifference of his species. "He hates being carried. I don't know why my gran gave him to me. She said every wizard needs a familiar. She's not wrong, but Trevor might not be the right match. Don't say that to him. He's sensitive." Harry looked at the toad. The toad looked at Harry. Something passed between them that was probably just Harry's overactive imagination, but he could have sworn Trevor straightened slightly. "Your gran is Augusta Longbottom?" Harry said. Neville blinked. "You know her?" "I know of her. She held her family's seat in the Wisengamot for 11 years after the war without an heir to back her claim. That's not a small thing." He watched Neville absorb this, watched the surprised pleasure of someone having their family seen clearly. "She's formidable. She terrifies most people," Neville admitted. "That's not contradictory." Neville looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating again, but this time for a different reason, not because of the scar, but because of the sentence. Then the compartment door slid open again and this time it was a girl with large front teeth and a great deal of hair, carrying a book that she was still actively reading while she navigated the doorway, which was impressive logistics. She looked up from the book to check the compartment. Brown eyes, very alert, moving quickly between Harry and Neville and the space available. "Can I sit here? Every other compartment is either full or there are boys in them doing things with dung bombs." "Yes," Harry said. She sat, finished her paragraph, marked her page with precise deliberateness, and looked up. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the course books already and most of the supplementary reading in the library at Flourish and Blots." She said this as pure information, without boast and without apology, which Harry appreciated. "Are you both first years?" "Yes," Neville said. "Harry Potter," Harry said. The sequence again. Hermione was interestingly different. She did the scar check and the recalibration, but what followed in her eyes was not social calculation or awe. It was something closer to academic reassessment, like a fact had been confirmed that changed the shape of several surrounding facts. "I've read about you," she said. "What have you read?" "The books for young witches and wizards mostly. The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, some of a history of magic. The accounts are fairly consistent on the factual elements but quite inconsistent on the interpretation." A pause. "Nobody seems to agree on what actually happened. The magic involved, I mean. There's no good theory." "There's a theory," Harry said. "It's just not in those books." Hermione looked at him with sharpened attention. "You know what happened." "I know what I've been told and what I've worked out. Whether I'm right is a different question." He returned to his book. Hermione, he could feel, was vibrating slightly with suppressed follow-up questions, but she pulled herself back and opened her own book instead, which he found admirable. The train moved. England went past the window, first the grey outskirts of London and then green, rolling, genuinely beautiful countryside that Harry looked at between pages with the specific appreciation of someone who had seen most of the world's landscapes and still found England's particular greenness remarkable. The sweet trolley came and went. Harry bought everything, because Loki had raised him to believe that generosity in small things cost nothing and built everything, and because Neville looked like he was too anxious to ask and Hermione looked like she'd forgotten to bring anything. They sat with pumpkin pasties and chocolate frogs and the cards that came with them, and Neville knew the cards better than either of them. He had a collection at home, he explained, gaining confidence as he talked about something he clearly knew well. Harry listened to Neville talk about chocolate frog cards with the same attention he gave to everything, which was total. People talked about what they loved differently than they talked about anything else, and what they loved told you more about them than anything they could deliberately disclose. The compartment door slid open a third time, hard this time, with the particular energy of an entrance designed to be noticed. 3 boys, the central one blonde, recognizable, the 2 flanking him built for presence rather than conversation. "I heard Harry Potter was on the train," Draco Malfoy said, and then he saw Harry and his prepared expression shifted slightly. He recovered quickly. Harry gave him points for that. "Potter." "Malfoy," Harry said pleasantly. Draco came in without being invited, which Harry noted without comment. His eyes moved over Hermione and Neville with the brief, assessing quality of someone placing social coordinates. His expression when it landed on Hermione did something specific, a flicker of something that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite discomfort. "You're Muggle-born," he said. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said, with the same tone she'd used to introduce herself originally. "Pure information, no apology, no aggression, just here is a fact." Harry liked her more for it. "That's not what it's what I answered," she said, and looked back at her book. Draco looked at Harry, as though expecting an ally in this or perhaps just a reaction. Harry was eating a chocolate frog and looking at the card. "You two know each other?" Draco asked. "We met in Madame Malkin's," Harry said. "Right." A pause. "What house do you think you'll be in?" "Actually think." Harry considered this honestly. "I don't know how the sorting works specifically. I know what the houses value. I know what I value." He looked up. "They may not overlap cleanly." "What do you value?" Neville asked, genuinely curious. "Knowledge. Loyalty. Audacity. A beat. In that order, depending on the day." "That's 3 houses," Hermione said, without looking up from her book. "Yes," Harry agreed. Draco was still standing in the doorway with his flanking boys, and there was something happening in his face that was more interesting than anything his mouth was doing, the same quality Harry had noticed in Madame Malkin's, that underneathness, that person who was actually present and paying attention. "You're not what I expected," Draco said. "I know," Harry said. "What did you expect?" A pause. Draco, to his credit, actually considered the question rather than deflecting. "I don't know." Something more, he made a gesture that meant heroic posture, symbol, chosen one energy. "Disappointing," Harry said sympathetically. The corner of Draco's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something approaching it, then backing off. He looked at Neville. "Longbottom," he said, acknowledging the name. Neville sat slightly straighter and said nothing. Then Draco looked at Hermione, and the not quite contempt was back, and he left it there, and left. When the door closed, Hermione set down her book. "Is he always like that?" "I've met him twice," Harry said. "Both times, yes." "Pure blood nonsense," she said, matter-of-factly. "I've read about it. The wizarding world has a documented cultural tendency toward inherited hierarchies of worth that have no factual basis in magical ability." She said this with the tone of someone reviewing a disappointing study. "It's sociologically tedious. It's also dangerous," Harry said. Yes, she said. That too. Neville was looking between them. Were you nervous? Coming today? No, Harry said. I was terrified, Neville admitted. I still am. My whole family is magical and I barely manage to do anything at home. My grands always said I'm not as talented as my father was, and he was. He stopped, and something moved across his face that was private and old, the kind of hurt that had been carried for a long time and learned to take up less space than it deserved. Harry knew about Frank and Alice Longbottom. Hela had told him, their story was the kind of story she kept track of, people who had suffered at the hands of others' choices, people who were still technically among the living but occupied a space she knew well. Your father was very brave, Harry said. Your mother too. Neville looked at him with the slightly startled expression of someone who'd been hurt in a way they hadn't fully expected. You know about them? Yes. Harry held the look, level and clear. Being brave and being powerful aren't the same thing. Neither are being powerful and being a good wizard. He paused. Your gran is wrong about you. I've known you for 2 hours and I can see that. Neville opened his mouth and closed it. Trevor the Toad made a small sound. Hermione was looking at Harry too, with an expression she hadn't worn before, something more personal than the academic assessment, something that was deciding something. I think, she said carefully, that this year is going to be more interesting than I planned for. Almost certainly, Harry said, and went back to his book. Hogwarts at night, seen from the boats, was the kind of sight that Harry thought Loki would have appreciated, not for its grandeur exactly, though the grandeur was real, but for the specific quality of its age. The castle sat above the lake with the comfortable authority of something that had been there long enough to stop needing to prove it, its towers lit from within, its reflection broken into gold pieces on the dark water below. Harry sat in the front boat because Neville had been closest to the front and Harry had followed without thinking. The boat moved across the lake under its own power, and the castle grew, and around him he could hear the sounds of first years being genuinely awestruck. He understood the awe. He just experienced it differently, not as something that made him feel small, but as something that added to an internal list of genuinely remarkable things. Professor McGonagall met them at the entrance, tall, precise, with the posture of someone who had been dealing with 11-year-olds for decades and had never once found it less demanding. She looked over the assembled first years with the practiced eye of a shepherd who has learned to assess the flock quickly for signs of impending disaster. Her eyes moved to Harry and stayed for a half-second longer than the others. He looked back without any particular expression. She looked away. She explained the sorting briefly, the hat, the houses, the expectations. While she spoke, the doors to the great hall remained closed, and through them Harry could hear the warm murmur of several hundred students arranged at 4 long tables, the specific noise of a school community settling into its annual reopening routine. He could also feel something. He'd been feeling it since the boats, a warmth in the castle itself, in its stones, the same quality as the warmth in his wand but slower, older, accumulated rather than concentrated. Magic had been done here for 1,000 years. It was in the walls the way salt was in the sea. He pressed his palm flat against the stone beside him and felt it pulse once, faint and deep, like a heartbeat. Potter, said a voice beside him, low. He turned. A boy he hadn't met yet, dark red hair, tall, with a look of frank and uncomplicated friendliness that was different from the calculated social maneuvers he'd been navigating all day. Several more redheads at various distances, all with the same hair, which suggested family. Ron Weasley, the boy said. My brothers say you're actually here. We thought maybe it was a rumor. Not a rumor, Harry said. Right. Ron looked at him with the straightforward curiosity of someone who had no particular agenda. Is it weird? Being, you know. You. Harry considered this. I don't have a comparison point. Fair enough. Ron seemed satisfied with this answer in the way that direct answers satisfied people who asked direct questions. My mum was friends with your mum, I think. When they were at school. She talked about her sometimes. He said it simply, without making it into more than it was, which Harry appreciated. What did she say? That she was brilliant and kind and terrifying when she was angry. A pause. Mum said she reminded her of herself that way. Which is, she meant it as a compliment. I know, Harry said. It is one. McGonagall led them through the doors before Ron could say anything else, and the great hall opened up around them, vast, candlelit, with a sky ceiling that showed real stars above, and 4 tables full of students who had been anticipating this moment. The noise dropped as they walked in, the way it would drop for any first-year procession, and then dropped further as recognition rippled through the room like a stone thrown in water. Harry felt it, the wave of attention, the specific quality of a room full of people who had heard a name for 10 years suddenly being given a face to attach it to. He kept walking. He did not look around to find the attention, did not acknowledge it, did not shrink from it. He walked the way Hela had taught him to walk, as though the ground belonged to him, not by right of ownership but by right of presence, because he was here and here was where he was, and that was sufficient. At the front, a battered old hat sat on a stool, and as they arranged themselves in a line it opened a brim like a mouth and began to sing. Harry listened. The song was genuinely clever in its construction, centuries of accumulated observation of human nature distilled into rhyme, which was an interesting formal choice. He particularly noted the lines about the nature of each house, the ways they overlapped at their edges, the things the hat carefully didn't say about what separated them. Then McGonagall called names, and one by one the first years went up and the hat was placed on their heads and the hat thought and then spoke. Hermione went early, the hat barely touched her head before it said Gryffindor with a certainty that felt like it had been waiting to say it. She sat at the Gryffindor table with a satisfaction so complete it was visible from across the hall. Neville went, and the hat sat on his head for a very long time, long enough that Neville's hands, clasped in his lap, went white at the knuckles. Then Gryffindor, and Neville exhaled so completely he nearly collapsed, and the Gryffindor table's applause had a warmth to it that was genuine. Draco went, the hat hadn't finished descending before it said Slytherin, and Draco walked to the green and silver table with the posture of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd already known. Ron went. Gryffindor, immediate, no deliberation. Then, Potter, Harry. The hall had been loud with the rolling applause and commentary that accompanied each sorting. When McGonagall said his name, it went quiet in a way that the others hadn't, a specific, anticipatory quiet, the kind that had something held in it. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the hat came down over his eyes, and the world went dark. Well, said a voice, directly in his mind, with the interested quality of something encountering something unexpected. This is different. Hello, Harry said. I don't often get greeted, the hat said. Most students are either terrified or impatient. I'm neither. No. I can see that. A pause, and in the darkness Harry could feel the hat actually thinking, not the quick assessment it had given most of the others, but something deeper, slower, turning him over the way you turn something complex in your hands to understand its shape. You're interesting, Potter. Very interesting. I've sorted 11,412 students, and I've never sat on a head quite like this one. What do you see? Everything, the hat said. That's the problem. Gryffindor wants you, your nerve and your loyalty and your fire. Ravenclaw wants you, the curiosity, the hunger to understand. Slytherin has a genuine claim, resourcefulness, self-possession, the ability to do what needs doing without asking permission. A pause. But underneath all of it, there's something I don't have a house for. Something that belongs to a different taxonomy entirely. I know, Harry said. You're not afraid of where I put you. No. Most students are, at this stage. I know what I am, Harry said. Where I sit is secondary to that. Another long pause. The hat seemed to be having a genuinely good time. Very well. If I must choose, and I must, then I'll put you where you'll do the most interesting things with the most interesting people. Not where you'll be safest. Not where you'll be most comfortable. Harry waited. Gryffindor. The hat was lifted. The Great Hall came back. The Gryffindor table erupted, loudly, the way Gryffindors apparently did everything. Harry stood up from the stool and walked toward the red and gold table, and as he walked he felt the hall's attention on him, a palpable thing, physical almost. He let it be. He sat between Hermione and Neville, across from Ron, who was grinning with the open delight of someone who had wanted a specific outcome and received it. At the Slytherin table, he could see Draco Malfoy watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read from this distance, not hostile. Something more complicated than hostile. At the head table, the professors sat in a row of black robes and varying expressions. Harry looked at them with deliberate attention, cataloguing. McGonagall, sharp and fair. A small wizard with a turban that seemed to require structural engineering assistance. Harry filed him under something is wrong here immediately, not from evidence but from the quality of wrongness that Hela had taught him to recognize, the smell of a thing that was hiding another thing. An old man with a very long beard at the center of the table who was watching Harry with the specific attention of someone who had been waiting for something and was now reconsidering what they'd been waiting for. Albus Dumbledore. Harry had known he was here. Had known he would be studied. He met Dumbledore's eyes across the Great Hall, met them directly, without challenge and without submission, with the level clarity of someone who was aware of being looked at and was unbothered by it. Dumbledore's expression changed. It was subtle, years of very controlled facial management, not much leaked, but something moved behind his eyes, something that was an upward revision of an estimate. Harry looked away first. Not because he was yielding but because he was done with that particular exchange and had seen what he needed to see. Brilliant. Ron said. I was worried you'd be Slytherin, no offense to anyone who, none of them are in earshot, Hermione said. Right, yeah. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. He was looking at Harry with the slightly helpless expression of someone trying to reconcile an expectation with a reality. You're not like what I thought you'd be. What did you think? Harry asked. This was becoming a theme. Bigger? Ron said. I mean, you're our age. Obviously. But you were supposed to be, I don't know. Legendary. I'm 11, Harry said. Yeah. Ron nodded, processing this. Yeah, fair enough. He reached past Harry for the nearest dish as the food appeared, a move of such comfortable self-possession that it was clearly just who Ron was, and began piling his plate with the focused happiness of someone who'd been looking forward to this for hours. What were you like before? Where were you all this time? If that's not, I was around, Harry said. Learning things. What kind of things? Harry considered how to condense the last 10 years into something that answered the question without requiring a 4-hour explanation. Old magic, he said. Different traditions. The way power works under the rules and how it works above them. He looked at Ron's interested face and Hermione's even more interested face and Neville's quietly attentive face. I'll tell you more sometime. Not all at once. Fair, Ron said. Hermione was visibly restraining a list of specific questions. Harry made a note to answer them eventually, in the right order, when the right context existed. She would be a good person to think alongside, he'd identified that on the train. She processed information the way he did, rigorously, building structures rather than just collecting facts. The feast was extraordinary. Harry ate with the appreciation of someone who had eaten Hela's perpetually slightly cold food for large portions of his childhood and could therefore deeply value the specific excellence of very good shepherd's pie. Around them the hall filled with conversation and laughter and the particular noise of a community reassembling itself after summer, and he sat in the middle of it and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific sensation of being among something rather than watching it from outside. He was surprised to find he liked it. After the feast, after the prefects had led the first years up through a castle that seemed to rearrange itself slightly between one visit and the next, Harry noted 3 staircases that moved, 2 corridors that weren't on the mental map he'd constructed from descriptions, and 1 portrait that was definitely listening to conversations and not bothering to hide it, they reached the Gryffindor common room. The fat lady looked at Harry when he stepped through and said, in the tone of a portrait that had opinions. Harry looked at the common room. The fire was large, the chairs were battered and comfortable, the notice board was already accumulating the first layers of the semester's parchments. Red and gold everywhere, which he found cheerful without finding it overwhelming. Some of the older students were already here, they'd come up a different way, and their eyes found Harry with the same quality of attention he'd been navigating all evening. He ignored it the way he ignored most things that were more about him as symbol than him as person, and went to find a chair near the fire. Percy Weasley, who was a prefect and had led them up, was explaining the rules of the common room to the assembled first years with the earnest precision of someone who genuinely loved rules. Harry listened with half his attention and used the other half to look at the room. There was a boy watching him from a chair across the fire, 2nd year, maybe 3rd, with the look of someone who'd come down specifically to see rather than to socialize. He caught Harry's eye and looked away. Harry felt the castle again, under his palm on the arm of the chair, that pulse, old and deep. He pressed gently, and after a moment it pressed back, the way a cat sometimes pressed its head into an offered hand, not out of need but out of acknowledgement. Interesting. Later, in the dormitory, when Neville was already asleep and Ron was most of the way there and the other 2 boys in the room, Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan, both friendly in uncomplicated ways, were fading into quiet, Harry lay on his back in the dark with his hands folded behind his head and thought. The castle had magic in its stones that it chose to share or withhold. The man with the turban had something wrong about him that was specific, directional, like a wound that went deeper than the surface. Dumbledore had looked at him and revised an estimate, which meant Dumbledore had expected something specific and hadn't gotten it, which meant Dumbledore had been expecting the boy who lived, the symbol, the weapon pointed at the prophecy, not whatever Harry actually was. Voldemort was not dead. Harry had known this since Hela had explained to him, carefully and precisely, that the soul which had shattered against his infant magic had not been destroyed, only fragmented. It was somewhere. Possibly multiple somewheres, depending on what it had done before the night in Godric's Hollow. It would rebuild, if given time and opportunity. The turban man smelled of it, not the full presence, just a trace, a residue, like a cup that had held something dark and been incompletely cleaned. Harry looked at the ceiling of the dormitory. 1st year, then. A mystery at the center of the school, a headmaster who thought he knew what Harry was for, a dead man's fragment wearing a professor's turban, and somewhere beyond the walls of Hogwarts, the scattered pieces of the thing that had killed his parents trying to reassemble themselves. He turned this over in his mind the way the hat had turned him over, looking for angles, edges, the shape of the thing. Then he thought about Neville Longbottom's face when Harry had said his father was brave. Ron Weasley's open, uncomplicated grin. Hermione Granger restraining 11 questions because she'd understood instinctively that timing mattered. The castle's pulse under his palm. He thought about Loki saying, "What do you want to do?" Every time a choice appeared, and Hela saying worry is a prayer for things you don't want, curiosity is a tool. He was curious. He was very, very curious. He closed his eyes and in 3 minutes he was asleep, and his sleep was the deep, easy sleep of someone who was exactly where they decided to be and had no reservations about the decision. In his trunk, carefully wrapped in cloth between 2 books, the resurrection stone sat quietly, and the cloak of invisibility folded on top of his other things cast no shadow at all, and the yew wand with its thestral hair core rested in the pocket of his folded robes, and all 3 waited with the patience of things that understood waiting, for the morning to come and the year to begin. Chapter 4, What Gods Learn. The first defense against the dark arts class was on a Wednesday, which gave Harry 4 days to form preliminary assessments of everything else. Charms was taught by a tiny professor named Flitwick who stood on a pile of books to see over his desk and whose enthusiasm for the subject was the genuine article, not performed for the students but simply present, the way a musician's love for their instrument is present when they play. Harry liked him immediately. The theory Flitwick taught was cleaner than Loki's approach but drew on the same underlying principles, and when Flitwick asked the class to attempt Wingardium Leviosa on the second day, Harry's feather rose to the ceiling before he'd finished the wand movement. Flitwick dropped his roll book. "Very good, Mr. Potter," he said, recovering. Yes. 5 points to Gryffindor. "Perhaps try it with a bit less, that is, you might want to aim a little lower." "Sorry," Harry said, and brought it down. Around him, other students were making their feathers twitch and wobble with enormous concentration. Hermione's had risen about 2 feet, she was doing something with her wrist that wasn't quite right yet but would be soon. He could see her working toward it with methodical precision. He'd already done it properly, so he shifted his attention to what else he could do with the spell. Flitwick had explained Wingardium Leviosa as a straightforward levitation charm, which it was, but levitation was really just directed force applied to an object's relationship with gravity, and directed force was something Harry had been playing with since the Moroccan souk at age 9. He spent the rest of the class thinking about vectors. Transfiguration was McGonagall, who turned her desk into a pig and back before they'd sat down, and who informed them in the first 5 minutes that she would not tolerate lax practice or careless wand work. She said this while looking at the room generally, but Harry had the impression she was specifically not looking at him, which was its own kind of attention. When they attempted to turn matchsticks into needles, he made his fully metallic and the right shape but couldn't get the taper quite right in one attempt. He tried again. On the third attempt it was perfect, and he set it on the desk and picked up a second matchstick. McGonagall came by, looked at the needle, looked at him, and said nothing. She gave him points and moved on. Potions was Snape, and Snape was a problem in the way that only specific kinds of people were problems, not because they were dangerous but because they were certain. Severus Snape walked into the dungeon classroom with the billowing black robes of someone who had decided very early that entrance was a performance and had never reconsidered this decision, and he looked at the class with dark eyes that moved across them like something assessing inventory. When his eyes reached Harry they stopped. "Potter," he said. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked back at him. Said nothing. Snape's eyes narrowed fractionally. He'd been expecting something, deference, maybe, or defensiveness, or the flinching that a sharp tone from an authority figure usually produced in 11-year-olds. He didn't get any of them. "Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry recognized the test for what it was, not curiosity but aggression dressed as pedagogy. He also knew the answer. "Draught of living death," he said. "A sleeping potion so powerful it borders on death, which is part of why the nomenclature reaches for the word. The asphodel functions as the primary sedative agent, the wormwood acts to extend the potion's duration exponentially. Combined they produce something that can suspend all voluntary and most involuntary biological processes for a period determined by the concentration used." Silence. Snape had clearly expected either ignorance or partial knowledge, and had received something considerably beyond his question's scope. His expression did not change, which Harry recognized as the face of someone controlling an expression change. "Where would you look," Snape said, regrouping, "if I asked you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. It's used as a universal antidote against most poisons, which is why it was the first magical remedy developed by wizarding communities in contact with the medieval alchemical tradition, easier to retrieve than to synthesize." Another silence. Longer this time. "The difference between monkshood and wolfsbane," Snape said, and there was something different in his tone now, not warmer, nothing so simple as that, but recalibrated. "There is none. They're the same plant. Aconitum. Called both names in different traditions, and a third name, aconite, in the alchemical texts." Harry paused. The question is sometimes used to catch students who've memorized one name without understanding that plant names are culturally contingent rather than fixed. Snape looked at him for a very long moment. 5 points to Gryffindor," he said, which appeared to cost him something. "The rest of you should be paying attention rather than letting Mr. Potter carry your intellectual load." He swept away to the front of the class. Ron, beside Harry, leaned over and whispered, "How did you know all that?" I read the textbook, Harry said. I read the textbook, Ron whispered back, with feeling. It didn't do that for me. Snape's eyes snapped to them. Ron went back to his cauldron with great speed. He wasn't done with Harry. He spent the rest of the class finding small reasons to dock points from Harry's immediate neighbors, circling him at a distance, the way something territorial marked a boundary without direct engagement. Harry was aware of it and found it interesting. Snape was not what he'd expected from Loki's brief description, which had been complicated and capable and carrying something heavy, so don't mistake the carrying for the man. He was beginning to understand what that meant. After the class, Snape stopped him at the door. Not loudly, not for the room, everyone else filed out and then his voice dropped to something that was for Harry alone. Your mother, he said, was the finest potions student I ever taught. Harry held the look. I know, he said. She was brilliant. Something moved in Snape's face, deep and quick, like light through fast water. Yes, he said. She was. A pause that felt like a room that had more furniture in it than you could see. Don't waste what you've inherited. I don't intend to, Harry said, and left. By the time Wednesday arrived, Harry had a clear enough map of the social landscape to navigate it comfortably. The first years sorted themselves with the unconscious efficiency of any new group, Hermione becoming the academic center of gravity that everyone orbited when they needed to understand something, Ron becoming the social warmth that the group moved toward when they needed to feel at ease, Neville finding his particular space with slow, quiet determination that Harry found quietly satisfying to watch. The Gryffindors at large had opinions about Harry, ranging from Ron's easy acceptance to a louder boy named Seamus who wanted Harry to demonstrate magic at every available opportunity. Harry declined each request without particular drama, which seemed to confuse Seamus deeply. He'd also mapped the other houses. Hufflepuff was generally gentle and meant it, which he respected more than most people thought to. Ravenclaw was curious and sharp, and a girl named Padma Patil had already cornered him in the library with a list of questions about wandless magic that were more sophisticated than half the professor's questions had been. He'd answered 3 of them and given her reading directions for the rest. The Slytherins were complicated in the way that all groups with a coherent self-image were complicated, a shared identity that some of them lived out of genuine conviction and some of them wore because it was the nearest available suit of armor. Draco Malfoy sat at the boundary of these categories in a way that Harry was still calculating. He'd also identified, with absolute certainty, that something was wrong with Professor Quirrell. Not just the smell of dark magic that had been his first indicator, but a whole constellation of smaller things, the way Quirrell held himself, the slight hesitation before certain words that wasn't a stammer but something more deliberate, a quality of his attention that was bifurcated in a way that suggested he was always partly focused elsewhere, listening to something that wasn't in the room. The turban. The specific angle at which he never turned his head completely. Harry had said none of this to anyone yet. He was still gathering information, still building the picture from angles, still deciding what to do with what he found. Defense against the dark arts was the last class of Wednesday morning. The dungeon classroom was dim even for Hogwarts. Quirrell seemed to prefer low light, which Harry noted, and smelled of garlic in a way that was either Quirrell's personal choice or something more deliberate. Strings of garlic hung from various fixtures. The class shuffled in and arranged itself with the mild chaos of a group that hadn't yet established seating preferences. Quirrell stood at the front with his hands clasped, and his turban threw strange shadows in the dim light, and he smiled at them with the nervous pleasant expression he wore everywhere. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "I hope you're all, that is, we're going to begin today with something fundamental. The principle of defensive positioning." He talked. He was, Harry had to admit, not incompetent, the information was accurate, the theory was sound. But the teaching had a quality of distance to it, as though the speaker was reciting something memorized rather than speaking from the knowledge in their body. Loki had told him what that looked like. When someone tells you something they believe, it comes from the chest. When they tell you something they're performing, it comes from the throat. This was coming from the throat. Harry watched Quirrell demonstrate a shielding charm, Protego, basic but foundational, and the charm itself was perfectly executed. The theory Quirrell gave for why it worked was incomplete. Not wrong, but incomplete in a specific way, the way a map is incomplete when someone has removed the territory they don't want you to find. After the demonstration, Quirrell had them pair off and practice. Harry paired with Neville, which was his preference. Neville was still uncertain about his wand work, and practicing with him meant Harry could simultaneously work on the mechanics of the shield and think about something else, which turned out to be the back of Quirrell's head. The turban. He'd been thinking about the turban. Hela had taught him to think about what people covered and why they covered it. The garlic was too theatrical to be serious protection. Garlic against dark magic was a folk remedy with approximately no empirical basis. It was performance. Misdirection. Loki had taught him to ask, when something obvious is being shown to you, what does the obvious thing prevent you from seeing? He cast Protego with one hand and thought about Quirrell's back with the rest of his attention. Neville's jinx bounced off the shield and clipped a desk. Sorry. Neville said. Good power behind it, Harry said. Your wrist release is sharp. Really? Yes. You're actually quite strong with the wrist release. The hesitation before you cast is costing you time, not power. Neville looked at his wand. Then he cast again, without the hesitation, and the jinx was considerably cleaner. He looked at it like he'd surprised himself. From the front of the room, Harry felt Quirrell's attention shift toward him. Not look, shift, the way a compass shifts toward north, a directional quality that didn't require eyes. Harry didn't react. He kept working with Neville, kept his face on the exercise, and let the attention sit on him without acknowledging it. The attention stayed for a beat too long. Then it moved away. After class, walking back toward the castle, Ron fell into step beside him. You knew what all those spells were supposed to do before he explained them. Yes, Harry said. How? I've been studying this kind of magic for a long time. Defense? All of it. Defense. Offense. Theory. History. He looked at the castle as they walked toward it. The thing about defense against the dark arts is that you can't really understand it without understanding what you're defending against. And you can't understand what you're defending against without studying it directly. Ron considered this with the genuine attention he brought to things that weren't obvious to him. My mum wouldn't love that logic. It's still true. Yeah. A beat. Is Quirrell always that? I don't know. Off? Harry glanced at him. Ron had noticed. Not necessarily what Harry had noticed, but something, the offness, the quality of distance in the teaching. What did you think of him? He seemed wrong, somehow. Like someone wearing a costume they described to a tailor from memory. Harry looked at Ron with a new quality of attention. Ron, who had seemed at first glance like the straightforward social warmth of the group, was apparently also paying attention. That's a good description, Harry said. Ron shrugged. 6 older brothers. You learn to notice when someone's pretending. The troll happened on Halloween. Harry heard about it the way everyone heard about it, the announcement at the feast, the prefects organizing the evacuation of students from the Great Hall to their dormitories, the smell of something large and damp and distinctly not human filtering through the castle from somewhere above. He was on his feet before Percy Weasley finished the evacuation instruction. Hermione, he said. Ron looked up. What? She's not at the feast. She's been in the bathroom since this morning, she was upset about something. Harry was already moving against the flow of students, which required some navigation but not much. Corridors going to be between her and the dormitory. The troll's somewhere in the castle, Ron said, already following. I know. And we're going toward it. We're going toward Hermione, Harry said. The troll is incidental. They moved through corridors that were emptying fast, and Harry followed the smell. Hela had been very thorough about teaching him to use all available sensory information, and a troll smelled extraordinary, a combination of wet dog and curdled milk and something older and more animal underneath, up one staircase, along a corridor, and they found the bathroom at the same time they found the troll, which was standing in the corridor, approximately 12 feet of grey-green misery, holding a club that had probably started life as a small tree. Hermione was visible through the half-open bathroom door, pressed against the far wall, white-faced. Ron made a sound. "Stand back," Harry said, not loudly. "Harry, it's 12 feet," Harry had already moved. Not toward the troll directly, sideways, drawing its attention, and the troll's attention was not quick but was heavy, following him the way a slow tide follows the coast, and he led it 3 steps away from the bathroom door while simultaneously reaching with his other hand and pulling Hermione out of the bathroom behind the troll's back. She came without argument, which suggested her survival instincts were functioning properly despite the terror. The troll turned back. It had lost its initial target and was reassessing with the methodical confusion of something that had more body than brain. It looked at 3 children and made a calculation that Harry could follow clearly, the smallest, first. It swung the club at Harry. Harry stepped inside the swing. Hela had spent 2 years teaching him to fight things larger than himself, and the principle was always the same: close the distance until their size became a liability, and put his palm flat against the troll's kneecap and pushed. Not a spell. Just the same push he'd used in Morocco at age 9, the same directed force, the same want applied outward. The troll's knee went sideways and the troll went down like a building being demolished, hitting the floor hard enough to shake the corridor, and lay there making confused sounds. Harry stepped back. Hermione had both hands over her mouth. Ron's expression was somewhere between "I witnessed this" and "I cannot process what I witnessed." "Is it?" Hermione started. "Fine," Harry said. "Knocked it off balance. It'll be up in a minute." He looked at the troll, then at his friends. "We should probably be somewhere else before it remembers where it was going." They were halfway up the next staircase when they heard the distant sounds of professors arriving, McGonagall's voice, sharp with alarm, Quirrell's flutter of nervous sound, and Snape's cold precision. Harry could picture the scene they'd find: a troll on the floor of a corridor, mysteriously uninjured, with no obvious cause. "You didn't use a spell," Ron said, "on the stairs." "No. Just your hand." "Yes." "How?" "Same principle as the spells. Different mechanism." Harry looked at him. "I'll show you sometime if you want." Ron, who was still processing, nodded. Then he looked at Hermione. "Are you all right?" She had her composure back, largely. Her eyes were still wide but her hands were steady. "I think so." "Yes." She looked at Harry. "You didn't even hesitate." "Hesitation is usually the most dangerous part of a dangerous situation," Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. "I was reading about Harry Potter," she said, carefully, "and what I read described someone. I expected someone who would act in spite of being afraid. That's what the books described. Bravery as fear overcome." She looked at him. "You weren't afraid at all, were you?" Harry thought about this honestly. "I was calculating," he said. "That's not the same as not afraid. Fear runs on a different track than action for me. They don't interfere with each other." "How?" "Practice," he said. "Starting very young." Hermione filed this with the same careful precision she filed everything. "Who taught you?" "Someone I'll tell you about eventually." She accepted this, which she was learning to do with his partial answers, accept them as partial and trust that the rest would come. "Thank you," she said. "For coming to find me." "Of course," Harry said, as though this were obvious, because to him it was. November arrived with cold and Quidditch. The Gryffindor vs. Slytherin match was a significant event in the school's social calendar, which Harry had gathered from the rising tension in the common room and the visible stress on Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, who had at various points in October been found muttering play diagrams to himself in empty corridors. Harry had been made Seeker after an incident in early October where he'd followed a Remembrall on his broomstick without thinking particularly hard about it, and McGonagall had appeared, tight-jawed, and instead of confiscating him had brought him to Wood. Wood had looked at him the way cartographers look at undiscovered coastlines. "Can you do that again?" Wood had said. "Catch things mid-air?" Harry said. "Yes." "How fast can you turn?" Harry had considered the question, then taken the broom and demonstrated, and Wood had made a sound that had no linguistic content but was clearly deeply positive. He didn't love Quidditch the way Ron loved it. Ron loved it with the comprehensive, historically grounded passion of someone who had grown up inside the sport. Harry found it interesting on its own terms, which were different terms. The physics of it were genuinely elegant, flying as applied magic, the interaction of enchanted broomstick with natural wind, the translation of human spatial reasoning into three-dimensional movement. He liked the problem of it. The match against Slytherin was cold and clear, and the stands were full, and Harry sat on his broom at 60 feet and waited. Draco Malfoy was Slytherin's Seeker. He flew well, technically clean, properly trained. He caught Harry's eye across the pitch and held it for a moment with an expression that said, "This is the actual context I wanted for the competition that's been building since Madame Malkin's." Harry could work with that. He was 20 minutes into the match, Gryffindor up by 30, both Seekers still watching more than searching, when his broom started to behave badly. Not mechanical failure, nothing so innocent. Something was wrong with the enchantment, a deliberate wrongness, someone pulling the broom in multiple directions simultaneously. He held on, both hands hard on the handle, and looked down at the stands. He was looking for the source before he'd consciously decided to look. That was Hela's training: when something unexplained happens, find the anchor. Something is causing it. Find it. He found Quirrell in about 4 seconds. Standing in the stands, eyes fixed on Harry's broom, lips moving in tiny, precise movements. Not watching the game. Watching him. Harry made a decision in the space between one broom lurch and the next. He didn't alert anyone. He didn't shout. He reached down into the current of his own magic, the green fire core that had been humming at his center since birth, and pushed it outward along the connection that Quirrell's spell was trying to use, like running current back down a wire. Quirrell's concentration broke. His lips stopped moving. He sat down abruptly in the stands, looking shaken, and Harry's broom steadied immediately, and Harry had found a snitch 3 seconds later while everyone was still watching him to see if he was going to fall. He didn't fall. He dropped into a clean dive, came up 10 feet above the grass with the snitch in his closed fist, and the match was over. In the stands, Hermione looked at Ron. "Did you see what he did?" Before he caught it, the broom steadied and he did something, Ron said. He pushed back against whatever was affecting the broom. "I was watching Quirrell." Ron looked at her sharply. "Quirrell?" His lips were moving. And then they stopped. And then the broom. She looked at Harry, who was coming down on the pitch to the chaos of Gryffindor celebration. He found the source and broke the spell himself. In the middle of a Quidditch match. While holding on with both hands. She was quiet for a moment. "Ron. What is he?" Ron watched Harry accept Oliver Wood's enormous, suffocating hug with the slightly resigned expression of someone accustomed to unexpected physical enthusiasm from people twice their size. "I don't know," he said. "Something else." After the celebration, which involved the Gryffindor common room, an enormous quantity of food brought up from the kitchens, and Oliver Wood nearly crying actual tears of joy, Harry found a quiet window alcove and sent Nix out with a message. The message said, "Someone at the school tried to interfere with my broom during the match. The same person I told you about from the first week. He has something attached to him that doesn't belong. I'll handle it, but I wanted you to know." Nix came back in 3 hours with a reply in Loki's handwriting: "Don't handle it alone. Observe. Build the picture. Tell me everything you find." Below that, in different handwriting, darker ink, more precise: "If he touches you again I'll take his head off." Harry smiled, folded the letter, and went to bed. Christmas came with the castle half emptied. Most students went home, leaving the halls with a spacious quiet that Harry found pleasant rather than lonely. He'd chosen to stay. Ron stayed too, his family unable to afford the travel, and they had the Gryffindor Tower largely to themselves for 2 weeks. It was the best 2 weeks Harry had at Hogwarts all year. They ate enormous breakfasts alone at the long table and played chess. Ron was extraordinary at chess, the real kind, the kind that was about 3 moves ahead in intuition and reading the other players' thinking, and Harry was genuinely challenged, which he found pleasurable. They explored the castle with the freedom of students who weren't worried about being somewhere they shouldn't. Harry had been exploring corners of it on his own since October, but with Ron beside him it was different, more conversational, more fun. On Christmas morning there was a small pile of gifts at the foot of Harry's bed. From Ron, a handmade box of Honeydukes chocolates with a note in Ron's handwriting that said Happy Christmas, thought you'd want the ones with the real filling, not the holiday ones. From Hermione, who had gone home, a book on advanced charms theory with a note that said I thought this might be at your level. From Neville, who had also gone home, a pot of something magical that turned out to be a mandrake seedling, because Neville had apparently decided Harry needed to understand plants and had started him at the beginning. And then a package he didn't recognize, no note, no sender, just a silver-gray shimmer of fabric. He lifted it out. It fell through his fingers in the familiar way that it had in the Gringotts vault. The invisibility cloak. He'd left it in the vault because he hadn't needed it. Someone had sent it here. No note. He turned it over. At the edge of the inner hem, barely visible against the fabric, a small symbol had been worked into the thread, not the Deathly Hallows symbol exactly, but something related to it, something older. He knew who'd sent it. Of course he knew. The question was why now, why here? He thought about it while he ate breakfast alone, Ron still sleeping. He thought about the castle, and the restricted section of the library, and the corridors he hadn't been down yet, and the mirror that several students had mentioned in hushed, slightly obsessive tones, the mirror that was somewhere in the school and that made people stand in front of it for hours. He knew what it was. Erased. He'd read about it. He knew what it did. After breakfast, he put the cloak on, and disappeared, and went looking. He found it in an unused classroom on the 3rd floor, not the locked corridor, a different 3rd floor room, dust on the floor and the mirror standing against the far wall, massive and gold-framed, with the inscription carved into the top. Erist stra eru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. He decoded it before he got within 20 feet. He stood in front of it. The mirror showed him, himself. Standing as he was, in the empty room, cloaked and uncloaked simultaneously, lit by the winter light through the high windows. He waited. The image didn't change. He thought, I show not your face but your heart's desire. And the mirror was showing him himself, exactly as he was, nothing added. He stood there for a long time, reading this. He thought about the canon of what the mirror showed. Dumbledore had said he saw himself with a good pair of thick woolen socks, which was almost certainly not true and was a very elegant deflection. The mirror showed what the heart wanted most, what it lacked, what the deepest self reached toward. If the mirror showed him exactly as he was, then what did that mean? He thought about it. He was not, he knew, without desire. He wanted things. He wanted to understand the mystery at the center of the school. He wanted to defeat the thing that had taken his parents. He wanted to keep his friends safe. He looked at the mirror again. Himself. Standing in the room. Whole. Oh, he thought. After a childhood of being the symbol, the boy who lived, the chosen, the prophesied, the idea, the thing he wanted most was simply to be what he was. Not more than that. Not the legend. Not the weapon. Just Harry, exactly as himself, whole and present and enough. The mirror was showing him that he already had it. He stood there for a while longer, not in the grip of the mirror the way others were gripped, not desperate, not longing, not frozen. Just thinking. Then he covered it with the cloak so no one else would have to see it tonight, and went back to bed. He told Hermione and Ron about Quirrell in January, in the library, with a muffliato charm cast over their table that made the surrounding air fill with unintelligible whispers. "Something is attached to him," Harry said. "Something dark. It's using him." Hermione's eyes were very wide. "Using him how?" "Like a host. The way a parasite uses a host. The thing is riding him, living through him." He looked at them both. "It's the fragment of Voldemort that survived the night my parents died." The name landed the way it always landed with people who'd grown up in this world. Ron's face went through several colors. Hermione's hand tightened on her quill. "You can say the name," Harry said. "He's not in the room. He's in the back of Quirrell's head." "How do you know?" Hermione said. "Because I can feel what's left of him. I've been able to since Quirrell looked directly at me at the feast. There's a connection. Like finding the matching end of a wire." He watched their faces. "I know this is a lot." "A bit, yes," Ron said, in a tone of absolute understatement. "There's more." He looked at the table for a moment, organizing the pieces. "There's something in the school that he's trying to get to. Something being guarded on the 3rd floor, the locked corridor. I don't know what it is yet." "I do," Hermione said, quietly. They both looked at her. She'd gone slightly pink, the color of someone about to admit to an information acquisition of potentially questionable ethics. "I've been in the restricted section," she said. "Not the very restricted section, just the part that requires a. I asked Professor Flitwick for a note and he gave me one without asking why. I was looking into protective enchantments, because I wanted to understand what kind of magic would be used to guard something significant." She straightened slightly. "It's the Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel. The elixir of life." Silence. "Right," Harry said. "So he wants immortality." "He's already technically immortal," Hermione said. That is, he's surviving in a state that isn't life but isn't death either. The stone would give him a body. A real one." Harry thought about this. About the fragment of Voldemort clinging to Quirrell's skull. About the quality of its presence, not strong, not what it had been before the night in Godric's Hollow. Weakened, diminished, working through a borrowed body, working towards something that would restore it. "He won't get it," Harry said. "The protections on that corridor are considerable," Hermione said carefully. "I've identified most of them from context, but even so, that's not what I mean," Harry said. He looked at both of them, and his eyes were very clear and very green. "He won't get it because I won't let him get it. Not this year. Not in this school." He paused. "I need you both to trust me on this." Ron held his gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "All right." Hermione studied him for a beat longer, the precise, rigorous study of someone checking a theorem before accepting it. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "But I want to know everything you know. All of it." "Yes," Harry said. "That was always the plan." The muffled whispers of the muffliato charm moved around them like weather, and outside the library windows the Scottish winter pressed cold hands against the glass, and somewhere below the castle Voldemort's shadow made its slow plans, and Harry began to explain. Chapter 5, The Mirror and the Stone March arrived cold and specific, the way Scottish March always arrived, not winter anymore but not yet anything else, the kind of month that couldn't commit to a season and compensated by being aggressively grey. The lake was iron-colored most mornings. The grounds were wet underfoot. The castle responded by burning its fires higher, and the common room in the evenings had a warmth to it that Harry had come to value, sitting with Ron and Hermione and Neville across textbooks and chess boards and the occasional debate about magical theory that started academic and got personal somewhere around the 3rd hour. He'd spent February building the picture the way Loki had taught him, patiently, systematically, adding one piece at a time and not forcing them to fit before they were ready. He knew the layout of the third-floor corridor from 3 separate angles, a map he'd constructed from memory by walking adjacent passages, a description extracted from the castle's own architectural history in the library's older holdings, and a single brief look through the keyhole of the locked door that had told him more than either of the other 2 combined. He knew the protections. Hermione had helped with this. She was extraordinary at research in a way that Harry found genuinely impressive, not because she was fast, though she was, but because she found the right questions. She'd identified 6 layers of protection from available evidence and theoretical deduction, a floor with a living creature, something involving flight, something with a logic puzzle, something with a plant, something with chess pieces, and something else she hadn't been able to identify yet because it didn't match any standard protective enchantment in the literature she'd accessed. "It's bespoke," Harry said, when she told him. "Something made specifically for this situation. Not a published charm." "Which means someone at this school created it," she said. "Dumbledore," Harry said. "Has to be. The other protections match the professor profiles, the plant is Sprout, the chess is McGonagall, the logic puzzle is probably Snape, but the final layer would be the headmaster's. He wouldn't leave the most important thing to someone else's work." They were in the library, the muffliato running its constant whisper curtain around them. Neville was at the end of the table with herbology notes. He came to these meetings now, had been brought in naturally over several weeks, not because Harry had decided to include him but because Neville had started showing up with useful information and the quiet, solid attention that was his particular strength. Ron was absent. He was at Quidditch practice, which would have escalated to 6 times a week in anticipation of the match against Hufflepuff that would determine the House Cup trajectory. "The thing I keep coming back to," Hermione said, "is Quirrell's timeline. He's been trying to get past the protection since before the school year started. The break-in at Gringotts in July was him. Or rather, Voldemort using him." "Yes," Harry said. "The vault they broke into was emptied the same day. Hagrid went to collect something. I'd bet the stone was moved here that day. So whoever sent Hagrid to collect it, knew the break-in was coming." He looked at the table. "Dumbledore sent Hagrid. Which means Dumbledore knew. The implications of this sat between them in the whisper curtain there." "He knows Voldemort is here," Hermione said, carefully. "He suspects. He might know more than suspect." Harry looked at her. "He brought the stone here deliberately. The school is the trap, not just the vault. You think he's using the stone as bait?" "I think," Harry said, "that Dumbledore has a long game. He's very good at them. He's been playing one since before we were born." He paused, and something moved through his face that was complicated and honest. "I don't think he's wrong about Voldemort being dangerous. I don't think he's wrong that Voldemort needs to be stopped. I think he's wrong about the mechanism. He thinks there's a chosen path and he knows what it is." "The prophecy," Hermione said quietly. Harry looked at her. She held his gaze without flinching. "You know about it." "I found references. Nothing complete, the Hall of Prophecy is in the Ministry, not accessible from Hogwarts." She paused. "But the references I found were enough to construct the shape of it." "And the shape suggests you?" "Yes," Harry said. "It suggests me." He held the knowledge evenly, the way Hela had taught him to hold facts that had weight, not refusing their gravity, not being crushed by it either. "Dumbledore believes the prophecy is a fixed path. That I'm positioned at a specific point on it that he can direct." His green eyes were very clear. "He's wrong about that. The prophecy describes a potential. A convergence point. It doesn't describe a path." "How do you know?" "Because I've talked to someone who knows more about the nature of fate and death than anyone alive." He met her eyes. "Trust me on this one." She did. He could see the moment she decided to. "So what do we do?" she said. "We get to the stone before Quirrell does," Harry said. "Not because Dumbledore's plan is wrong in its goal, keeping the stone from Voldemort is right. But because I want to do it on my terms, not as a piece on someone else's board." When? He'd been thinking about timing since February. The question was what would drive Quirrell to move, what would make him decide that this particular night was the night to push through the protections. Something would have to change, some factor that made waiting more dangerous than moving. He hadn't had the answer yet. He'd been watching Quirrell for the variable that would shift his calculation. He got it the last week of March, when he followed the Dada professor to the library, not the public part, the restricted section, and watched Quirrell stand in front of a particular shelf with his hand pressed flat against the spines of the books there, and felt the thing on the back of Quirrell's head push, felt it extend its attention outward in a way that was almost desperate, almost urgent. It was losing strength. The fragment of Voldemort that was riding Quirrell was degrading. The borrowed body, the insufficient vessel, the months of waiting, it was costing him something, depleting something that couldn't be replenished without the stone. The urgency Harry felt from it had a different quality now than it had in September. September had been cold and calculating. March was beginning to have a sound like something running out of time. Harry stood in the library with the invisibility cloak pulled tight around him and understood, Quirrell wouldn't wait much longer. The variable had shifted. He went back to the common room, picked up the nearest chess piece from Ron's abandoned board, and turned it in his fingers. A few days, he thought. Maybe less. He told Hermione and Ron that evening. He didn't tell them his full plan because the full plan required certainty about the final protection, Dumbledore's lair, that he didn't have yet. But he told them the timing. Ron's reaction was characteristic. Right, he said, with the expression of someone who had processed we may be going into a dangerous place in the next few days and had landed on okay, what do I need to know? What do we do when we're in there? I deal with whatever is at the end. You help with the middle. The chess pieces, Hermione said. She'd identified that protection 2 months ago, a life-size chess game, McGonagall's design, that would have to be played through. Ron should handle that one. Ron sat up slightly. Yeah. You're the best chess player I've ever seen, Harry said. Including people several times your age. This was true and Ron knew it was true and he still looked briefly startled by having it said directly. All right, he said. Yeah. I can do that. The plant is Devil's Snare, Hermione said. Light and warmth. Straightforward. The flying thing is keys, Harry said. I can do that. He paused. There may be a potion logic puzzle after the chess. That one is yours, Hermione. She nodded, already working through it in her mind. He could see the internal computation starting. And then? Ron said. And then I go through alone, Harry said. Harry, Voldemort can't be fought by 3 11-year-olds simultaneously, Harry said, simply and without drama. He can be fought by me. You need to get back and get a message out, I'll give you something to send before we go in. If I'm not back in 2 hours, send it. To who? Ron said. Harry pulled a small folded piece of parchment from his pocket. He'd written it 2 weeks ago, when he'd started building toward this. This address, he said. However you can. Ow, flu, any way you can find. It's the most important thing either of you will do tonight. Hermione took the parchment and looked at the address, and looked up with a question in her eyes that she held back, respecting the partial answer agreement. We'll send it, she said. Good. He looked at both of them. You don't have to come with me into the corridor. Obviously we're coming with you into the corridor, Ron said, with the tone of someone putting a stupid question to rest. Obviously, Hermione agreed. Harry looked at them for a moment, this specific moment, these two people who had chosen to be alongside him without being asked and without requiring anything from him in return. He'd never had that before. Not from other children, not from people his own age. He'd had Loki and Hela, which was enormous and irreplaceable, but it was different from this. Thank you, he said. Oh, shut up, Ron said warmly. Save it for after. It was a Tuesday when Quirrell moved. Harry knew before he saw anything, He woke at 2 in the morning with the connection to Voldemort's fragment active and loud and urgent, like a wire gone live, and he was dressed and out of the dormitory in 90 seconds. He knocked on Hermione's door on the way, a specific knock they'd arranged, 3 short. By the time he was at the bottom of the stairs she was behind him, and Ron appeared from the boys' dormitory barely 30 seconds later, and the 3 of them moved through the castle without speaking, because they'd been over this enough that speech wasn't necessary. Harry had the cloak. He spread it over all 3 of them. They were small enough to manage it if they moved close together, and they moved through the corridors as a single whisper of displaced air, 3 children in the dark heart of a castle, going towards something that the adults in this building had decided they needed to be kept away from. Fluffy was already past. The trapdoor was open. Harry looked at the square of open dark below the trapdoor and felt the connection to Voldemort's fragment below him, active and purposeful. Quirrell had been down here perhaps 40 minutes ahead of them. He went first. Dropped into the dark, landed on something soft, pulled away fast from the soft thing because the soft thing was the devil's snare and its tendrils were already reaching. Hermione landed beside him and had blue flames going before the 3rd tendril closed, the plant recoiled into the walls and they were through. The key chamber was full of winged keys, hundreds of them, swirling through the air in the erratic patterns of things designed to confuse pursuit. There were broomsticks. Harry took the nearest one and was in the air in 3 seconds, watching the swarm, looking for the pattern under the randomness. There was always a pattern. The keys that had been recently used would be moving differently, their trajectories disturbed, a gap in the coordinated chaos where one had recently been pulled out. He found it in 90 seconds. An old-fashioned key with a bent wing, flying slightly crookedly on account of the wing damage, one side slower than the other. He dove, closed his hand around it, and unlocked the door before he'd fully stopped moving. The chess room was enormous, the pieces marble and life-sized, the Black Army arranged across a stone floor that went as far as the room did. The white pieces stood waiting. Ron looked at the board with the specific, still attention he only had when he was doing this particular thing. He walked the edge of the board for 30 seconds, not speaking. His eyes moved across the arrangement with the rapid calculation of someone for whom board states translated directly into kinetic certainty. "We're white," he said. "We play white." He pointed. "Bishop takes that square. Harry, you're a castle. Hermione, you're that rook, far side." He pointed each of them to positions. "Don't move unless I tell you. The board will try to make you move, the pieces will push you into positions. Don't let them. Only move when I say." "How long will this take?" Harry said. Ron looked at the board again. 6 moves. 7 if they play the variation I think they'll play. He looked at Harry. "Go." It was 6 moves. The black pieces moved with the aggressive intelligence of McGonagall's design, the defensive counterplay was sophisticated, responsive, genuinely challenging. Ron played it the way he played everything, without apparent anxiety, seeing 3 moves ahead and adjusting for variables with the casual precision of someone who had spent 12 years playing and wasn't particularly impressed by the board he'd been given. On the 6th move he walked his own king to a sacrificial position, and the Black Queen took him. He hit the floor hard and lay there, and Harry moved forward immediately, but Ron raised a hand from the ground. "I'm fine." Knocked the wind out. "Go, it's open, go." Harry went. The logic puzzle room held 7 bottles in a row, and a fire barrier at each end, and a poem on the wall that Hermione solved in 4 minutes while Harry stood at the back of the room with his hand pressed to the connecting door and felt Voldemort's presence on the other side, throbbing and dark and no longer patient. "This one," Hermione said, pointing to one of the 7 bottles. "For going forward." Harry picked it up. It was small enough to contain 1 dose. "There's not enough for both of us," Hermione said. "The quantities are constrained." "I know." He picked up the bottle for going back and gave it to her. "Ron. Get him out. Send the message. Harry, Hermione." He met her eyes. "I've been to hell." I know what death looks like and I know what this is, and this isn't it. He said it simply, as fact, and watched something shift in her face from fear to not exactly confidence but something close to it. Send the message. 2 hours. She nodded. He drank the forward potion. Ice spread from his throat outward, coating his chest, his arms. He pushed through the fire. The last room was lit by low torchlight and larger than he'd expected, and it held one thing. The mirror of Eriste, standing in the center of the room. Quirrell was in front of it, his back to Harry, the turban a dark shape against the mirror's face. He was muttering at it, frustrated muttering, the kind that came from someone who expected a result and wasn't receiving it. Harry could see his own reflection in the mirror from where he stood, himself, hands at his sides, completely unsurprised. Quirrell heard him and turned. Up close, the signs of his occupation were worse than Harry had seen from a distance. The man's face had a hollowed quality, the eyes too wide, the shadows under them too deep, not someone who had been sleeping poorly but someone who was being consumed from within, the way a candle is consumed, losing substance to maintain a flame. Potter, Quirrell said. And then, in a second voice, layered under Quirrell's soft tones, different in texture and temperature, cold the way deep space is cold, absolute and without recourse, the boy. Of course. Hello, Harry said. A pause. Even Voldemort was briefly stopped by the complete absence of fear in that greeting. You're not surprised, Quirrell said, with Voldemort's attention moving through the words. No. You knew I was here. Knew all year. Since the feast, Harry said. You looked at me directly. I felt the connection. He kept his eyes on Quirrell's face and not on the back of the turban, because looking at the turban was what Voldemort would want. I've known what you were looking for, and why. And I know what the mirror shows you. Quirrell's hands had moved, wand out, held loosely, not raised yet. Do you? Nothing, Harry said. Because you don't know what you truly want. You want power, but power is not a true want, it's a mechanism. You want what it buys. But you've been separated from the understanding of what you actually want for so long that when the mirror looks into you, it finds nothing recognizable. Silence. Voldemort's presence pulsed, dark and cold, and for the first time it was threaded through with something else, something that on a human felt like a nerve being touched. Interesting, the second voice said. The child has been educated by someone unusual. Several unusual people, Harry said. Show me the stone, Voldemort said. Give it to me and I will let you live. I have use for someone of your caliber. Harry looked at the mirror. He walked toward it. Quirrell tracked him with the wand, not casting, watching. Harry stopped in front of the mirror and looked at his reflection, and his reflection looked back, and then, his reflection smiled, and reached into its pocket, and produced the stone. Harry felt it in his real pocket at the same moment. Solid and small and warm. The mirror's protection worked on desire, showed you what you wanted, gave it to those who wanted to use it for themselves. He'd worked this out in February, reading about Flammel, thinking about mirror logic, applying what he knew about desire and what the mirror had shown him in December. It gave the stone to someone who wanted to find it without wanting to use it. He closed his hand around the stone in his pocket and turned back to Quirrell. No, he said. Quirrell cast. Fast, no warning, and it was not a student spell, it was something designed to bind, to restrict, to prevent, a rope of dark energy that came at Harry from 4 directions simultaneously. Harry stepped through it. Literally stepped through it, shifting sideways in a way that Loki had spent 3 months teaching him, a movement that was not physical evasion but a kind of magical non-presence, becoming momentarily less there so the thing aimed at there had nothing to find. Quirrell's face went through surprise into the mask of Voldemort's concentration. He's been trained, Quirrell said, and it wasn't to Harry, it was inward, to the thing behind him. I know, Voldemort said, and the voice was more distinct now, rising toward the surface. Fascinating. We'll need to do this differently. Harry reached. Not for his wand, for the connection. The wire that had been live between them since September, the thing that ran from Voldemort's fragment to the place in Harry's forehead where the killing curse had hit and failed. He reached down into that green fire core and he pushed, not outward but along that connection, back toward its source, the way he'd done during the Quidditch match but harder, fuller, without the constraint of also needing to stay on a broom. Quirrell screamed. Not Quirrell exactly, something through Quirrell, the fragment that was using him, the piece of Voldemort that had made its home in a borrowed skull. Harry pushed again and the screaming intensified and Quirrell fell to his knees and Harry followed him down, kept the contact, not because he was being cruel but because he was being thorough, because Hela had taught him that the most dangerous thing was a wound left unfinished. He put his palm against Quirrell's face. The contact was immediate and total. Through it he could feel Voldemort's fragment clearly, not a soul, not a person, a concentration of will and hunger and something that had survived its own dissolution by refusing to understand that dissolution was meant to be final. He felt it burn against his touch. Felt it recoil. Felt it begin to lose its grip on the body it was using. Around him the room's temperature dropped sharply. The torches guttered. The mirror's surface went dark. Quirrell was convulsing under his hands, and Harry held the contact with the focused, deliberate patience of someone who had been taught to see a thing through to its actual end. The child, Voldemort said, and the voice was different now, thinner, more desperate, reaching. The child is doing something, yes, Harry said, quietly, to the room and to the fragment and to the absent soul of Quirinus Quirrell who was somewhere in there under the borrowed occupation. I know. The fragment released. It had to, the contact was destroying the vessel faster than it could maintain its hold. Harry felt it go, not fully, not finally, because the stone wasn't being used and the fragment wasn't being annihilated, only expelled, but it went, tearing out of Quirrell with the specific quality of something extracted rather than destroyed, drifting upward in a current of corrupted magic and dissipating into the room's cold air. Quirrell collapsed. Harry sat back on his heels and looked at him. The man was breathing, shallow, labored, but breathing. His face without the occupation was different. Younger. Something that had been held in fixed configuration by the will riding it had gone soft, uncertain, like a marionette whose strings had just been cut. The stone was in Harry's fist. He looked at it. Then he put it in his pocket, stood up, and looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back. Still himself. Still whole. He pressed his hand against the mirror's frame, and thought, you can go back to showing people what they want now. I've finished using the room. Then he turned and walked out through the fire. Ron was propped against the wall of the chess room with his legs out in front of him and a bruise developing across his left cheekbone. He looked up when Harry came through, and something in his face moved from held-breath tension to a relief so complete it was almost physical. You're all right, Ron said. Yes. Harry came to sit beside him. Hermione went back up to send the message. She argued for about 30 seconds, wanted to stay, but she went. He was looking at Harry's face. Did you, expelled it, Harry said. From Quirrell. The fragment. It's not gone but it's not here anymore. He paused. Quirrell's alive. He needs medical attention. Ron nodded slowly. You said you'd been to hell, he said, after a moment. You've actually been to, you know. Hell. Yes. With the dead and everything. Yes. Ron was quiet for a moment, processing this alongside a bruised cheekbone and the residue of a life-size chess game. Is it scary? Harry thought about Hela's great hall, the perpetual cold air, the dead moving through it like quiet water. The black flowers in the garden where a 4-year-old had placed a bird. The library with the best collection in any realm. No, he said. It's quiet. Cold. But not scary. Right, Ron said, with the tone of someone filing this under things I understand intellectually but have not yet processed emotionally. So who sent the message to? On the parchment. Harry opened his mouth to answer, and the wall behind them vibrated once, a deep pulse through the stone, and then a door that had definitely not been a door a moment ago became a door, and through it walked two people who could not possibly have found this place by any conventional route, and had therefore, clearly, not used a conventional route. Loki stepped through first, his coat absolutely pristine, his expression doing the complicated thing it did when he was managing several feelings at once and had decided that the dignity of managing them exceeded the honesty of expressing them. Behind him, Hela, and the chess room, which had been cold before, became genuinely cold, the kind of cold that remembered what it was adjacent to. Ron made a sound. He looked at Hela and then at Loki and then at Harry. "Those are, yes," Harry said. Loki looked at Harry for a long moment, the way he always looked at him after significant events, the assessment that started at the outside and worked inward, checking. His eyes came to rest on Harry's face, on whatever was showing there, and his expression did the thing where it stopped being managed. "The fragment," he said. "Expelled. Quirrell's alive but needs help. The stone is here." He held it up. Loki crossed the room in 6 steps and did something Harry had not anticipated. He pulled Harry into an embrace that was brief and hard and said more than the 3 months of training in tactical advice and observe, build the picture, tell me everything had managed to say. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then Loki released him and stepped back and reassembled himself, straightening his coat. "Good," he said. Harry looked at Hela. Hela was looking at him with those pale eyes, the half-dark, half-light face that had been the first face he remembered, the one that had crouched beside him in a black-flowered garden and told him death was a door. Her expression was not soft, Hela's expressions were never soft, but there was something in it that was its own version of everything Loki's 5 seconds had said. "You used the connection against him," she said. "Yes. You pushed through it rather than severing it. Severing it would have destroyed the host vessel. Quirrell didn't choose this." He held her gaze. "You taught me the difference." Something in her face settled, the way something settles when it has been a question and becomes an answer. "Yes," she said. "I did." Ron was sitting against the wall with his legs out, looking at the goddess of death with the stunned composure of someone who had decided that this evening had exceeded his capacity for surprise and he was simply going to experience the rest of it as a spectator. "Right," he said. "So. Friends of Harry's, then." "Family," Harry said. Loki looked at Ron with the considering expression he wore when he was deciding how to file a new person. Ron looked back with the frank, uncomplicated gaze that was just who Ron was, regardless of whom he was directing it at. "You played through a life-size chess game," Loki said, looking at the board around them. "And won." "Yeah," Ron said. "At 11. I've been playing since I was 3. A pause. "It's not that impressive." "It's quite impressive," Loki said, with the specific warmth he reserved for people who genuinely undersold themselves rather than performing modesty. "Don't argue with me about it." Ron didn't argue with him about it, possibly because he wasn't sure how. Harry stood up from the floor and pocketed the stone and looked at the 3 of them, Loki in his dark coat, Hela in the armor she'd been wearing when the message reached her, Ron still on the floor with his bruised face, and felt the specific satisfaction of a picture that had assembled itself correctly. "We need to deal with Quirrell," he said. "And someone needs to talk to Dumbledore." Loki and Hela exchanged a look over Harry's head. It was the look of 2 people who had been, in their own ways, looking forward to this particular conversation. "Oh," Loki said, and the smile that moved across his face was the one that meant I have been waiting for this opportunity for some time. "I'll take that one." Chapter 6, The God Between Worlds. Dumbledore's office had the quality of a room that had been accumulating personality for a very long time and had stopped apologizing for it. Every surface held something, silver instruments that spun and clicked and measured things whose measurement was not immediately obvious, portraits of former headmasters sleeping in their frames with the theatrical commitment of people who wanted you to think they weren't listening, books stacked in the specific way of someone who read 6 things simultaneously and kept them all in active use. A phoenix on a perch near the window, watching the door with the orange intelligence of something that had seen considerably more history than the room it currently occupied. Loki stood in the center of it with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at all of it with the calm, comprehensive attention of someone walking through a space and reading its owner from every object in it. The walk from the third-floor corridor to the headmaster's tower had taken 20 minutes. He'd taken the time to look at the school, really look at it, in the way he rarely looked at Midgardian buildings, because they were generally not interesting enough to reward serious attention. Hogwarts was different. The magic was real here, the old kind, layered into the architecture the way sediment layered into stone, not imposed on the building but grown through it over centuries. Whoever had founded this place had understood something fundamental about the relationship between magic and permanence. He found himself, despite everything, quite impressed. He'd sent Hela to the hospital wing with the instruction to make sure Quirrell was treated and also to have a word with Madame Pomfrey in whatever way seemed productive. Hela's version of a productive word with a medical professional would likely be memorable, but the outcome would be correct. He'd sent Harry to the Gryffindor common room with Ron, with firm instructions that he himself had no intention of enforcing because Harry would make his own decision about whether to comply, which was as it should be. Then he'd found a portrait and had a conversation with it. The portrait had, after initial reluctance, agreed to carry a message to the headmaster. Now he waited. Dumbledore came through the door at a pace that suggested he'd been somewhere else in the castle and had moved quickly when the portrait reached him. He was in his nightclothes under the outer robe, which he'd thrown on without fully fastening, a detail that Loki noted because it suggested genuine urgency rather than the managed urgency of a man who calculated his entrances. The half-moon spectacles were in one hand rather than on his face. He saw Loki and stopped. The stop was brief, barely a pause, less than a second, but it was real. A genuine interruption of forward motion by a brain that had received information it hadn't prepared for. Then he came the rest of the way into the room and closed the door and put his spectacles on. "I don't believe we've met," he said. "We haven't," Loki said. "Though you've been looking for information about me for approximately 10 months, which is when Harry received his Hogwarts letter and you began trying to reconstruct where he'd been and who he'd been with." Dumbledore moved to his desk. Not sitting, standing behind it, which Loki recognized as the positioning of someone who wanted the weight of the desk between them without conceding the appearance of needing it. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said. "You know my name." "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore," Loki said pleasantly. "Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. You collect titles the way some people collect furniture, more than you need, arranged for effect." He tilted his head. "My name is Loki. Of Asgard, formerly. Currently of wherever seems interesting." Something moved in Dumbledore's blue eyes, recognition of a category, a rapid filing of available information. He was fast. Loki gave him that. "Loki," he said. "Of the Norse tradition. People have been calling us traditions for centuries. We find it reductive. Forgive me." Dumbledore sat down, which meant he'd decided that the desk had served its purpose and he was better served by appearing unguarded. Another fast calculation. "You've had Harry since October 31st, 1981, Loki said. "Since the night your plan, or rather, the prophecy's plan, which you were administering, orphaned him." "I didn't, you chose not to intervene," Loki said, without heat, without accusation, as pure information, the way Harry said things when he wanted them to land cleanly. "You knew what was coming for the Potters. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the direction. You believed the encounter was necessary. You believed a sacrifice was built into the mechanism." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I'm not here to condemn that decision. I understand the logic of it, and I've made enough morally compound decisions in my own history to find simple condemnation somewhat hollow." A pause. "I'm here because you've been making a second decision, all year, about Harry. And that one I'm less willing to leave unaddressed." Dumbledore was quiet. Behind him, a portrait that had been ostentatiously asleep cracked one eye. "You brought the stone here as bait," Loki said. "To draw Quirrell into the open, to draw Voldemort into the open and place Harry in a position to face him," Loki said. "Those aren't the same thing. Quirrell without the stone is a compromised professor. Voldemort without a body is a diminished fragment. Neither of those required 11-year-old bait." He walked to the window, looked out at the grounds, the black lake, the dark forest, the sky going pale with the first suggestion of dawn. "You believe the prophecy is a road. That Harry is a vehicle moving along it toward a fixed destination that you can see from where you're standing." "I believe," Dumbledore said carefully, "that Voldemort must be faced, and that the nature of the connection between Harry and Voldemort makes Harry uniquely positioned to." "He expelled the fragment tonight," Loki said, still looking out the window. "From Quirrell. Without destroying the host. Without the use of his wand." He turned. "He's 11 years old and he has already exceeded the parameters you built your plan around, which tells you something about the quality of the plan's assumptions." Dumbledore absorbed this. The portrait that had cracked an eye now had both eyes open. "You've raised him," Dumbledore said. "For 10 years. You and my sister," Loki said. "Hela." The name came out with the weight of someone who had accessed significant information and found it sobering. "The goddess of, yes." He removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a deliberateness that was clearly a thinking gesture. "You've raised him among gods." "We've raised him as himself," Loki said. "Which is a different thing. He has his parents in him, James's nerve, Lily's depth. He has his own nature, which was shaped by the night Voldemort chose him and failed him. We gave him context for those things. We gave him the knowledge to understand what he is rather than the ignorance that would have made him manageable." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "You're about to tell me that's dangerous." "I was going to say," Dumbledore said, slowly, "that it is unexpected. And that unexpected is not the same as dangerous." He was quiet for a moment. "I had a plan for Harry Potter," he said, and the honesty in it was real. Harry had been right about that, Loki thought. The man was genuine in his convictions. "I believed I knew what was needed. Who he would need to be. The path he would walk." He looked at the window. "I am, I think, not entirely wrong about the destination. But I may have been limited in my understanding of the traveler." "Yes," Loki said. "You were." Another silence. The phoenix on the perch made a soft sound, the kind that was less vocalization and more acknowledgement. "What do you want?" Dumbledore said. "From this conversation." "From Hogwarts." "From me." Loki considered the question with the genuine attention it deserved. "I want you to understand what you have in that boy," he said. "Not what you planned for. What is actually there. He is not a weapon. He is not a symbol. He is not a piece on your board, and the moment you treat him as one, you will find that the board has changed into something you don't recognize." He pulled his coat straight. "He'll deal with Voldemort. Not because the prophecy says so and not because you've positioned him to, because Harry has decided it's the right thing to do and Harry's decisions are generally thorough. But he'll do it on his terms. And if his terms conflict with what is necessary, then we'll have that argument when we reach it," Loki said. "Not before. Not in a hospital wing conversation. Not in a strategy meeting about a 15-year-old boy's future." He moved toward the door. "He likes it here, for what it's worth. He likes the castle and he likes his friends and he finds the education genuinely interesting. He is not your enemy. He is not anyone's enemy right now." A pause at the door. "Try not to give him a reason to become one." He opened the door and walked out, and the portraits in Dumbledore's office were uniformly and unconvincingly pretending to sleep. The hospital wing was white and quiet, with the specific antiseptic peace of a place that dealt with injury often enough to have made peace with it. Quirrell was in the last bed, unconscious, his face without the turban for the first time, the back of his head bandaged, the colors of something that had been badly burned visible even from the doorway. Hela stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him with the even, patient attention she brought to the dying and the living alike, the attention that did not categorize or judge but simply witnessed. Madame Pomfrey had taken one look at Hela upon her arrival and had the extraordinary good sense to let her in without argument and to find pressing business at the other end of the wing. Harry came in quietly, Nyx on his shoulder, at around 5 in the morning. He'd left Ron in the common room, asleep in a chair with the bruised cheekbone he refused to let Harry heal because it was, he'd said, a good bruise, an earned bruise, and he intended to wear it for a while. Hela looked at Harry when he came to stand beside her. "He'll live," she said. The fragment's departure was violent. "There's damage. He'll carry it." She looked at Quirrell's slack face. But he chose this. Whatever Voldemort offered him, he chose to accept it. "People do terrible things for reasons that make sense to them," Harry said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't destroy the fragment." "No. You could have." "Yes." He looked at Quirrell. "But destroying it in Quirrell would have destroyed Quirrell. And the fragment itself, pushing it out is different from ending it. I know where it is, roughly. Better to know where it is." She looked at him. "You want to find the other pieces?" "Eventually, yes." He met her eyes. "Not this year." "But yes." Hela was quiet for a moment. The hospital wing held its white peace around them. "You know what Dumbledore believes," she said. "About the prophecy. That the connection between Voldemort and me is the mechanism by which he dies," Harry said. "Yes. I know. And he's partially right," Harry said. "The connection is real. What he's wrong about is whether that makes me the only relevant variable." He paused. "Voldemort has done things to make himself difficult to kill. Real things, not just dark magic theory. I could feel it in the fragment. Anchors. Parts of his soul separated and stored. If you kill the body without finding the anchors first, you haven't killed him. You've just displaced him again." Hela looked at him with the specific expression she wore when he said things that correctly mapped onto knowledge she held and hadn't shared yet. It was a look that contained both satisfaction and something that could have been, in a mortal, called pride. "When did you work that out?" "February," he said. The fragment felt wrong in a specific way, incomplete, like a copy rather than an original. "I've been in your library long enough to have some vocabulary for what that wrongness was." He looked at Quirrell's sleeping face. "I'll need to know more. About how he did it. About how many." "I know some of it," Hela said. "The ritual involved is not common. Ancient. What he's done to himself is technically unprecedented, which is why no one else has identified it." She paused. "I'll tell you what I know." "Not tonight," Harry said. "No. Not tonight." They stood together at the foot of Quirrell's bed as the hospital wing windows went from black to grey to the first tentative pink of Scottish dawn. Outside, the grounds were wet and still. A bird started somewhere in the forest, then another, the incremental construction of morning. "Loki's talking to Dumbledore," Harry said. "I know. He'll be enjoying it. Is that good or bad?" "It depends on whether he decides to be helpful or entertaining." She paused. "He usually finds a way to be both." Harry smiled. Nyx shifted on his shoulder, tucked her head slightly, accepting the morning. "Are you going back?" he said. "To hell. In a day or two." She looked at him. "You have the second month of term left. Then summer." "You could stay," he said. Not pleading, suggesting. With the specific casualness of someone who wanted something and was honest enough to name it without making it bigger than it was. Hela looked at him for a long moment. "I have a realm," she said. "I know. The dead don't administer themselves." "I know. I can't simply, she stopped. Harry waited. Outside, the birds were building their morning properly now, the full complexity of it, layered and specific. A few days, she said finally. I can stay a few days. Good, Harry said. The morning brought Dumbledore to the hospital wing at 9, by which time Harry was sitting in the chair beside Quirrell's bed reading a book on ancient runic theory, Nick's asleep on the headboard. Loki was in the chair on the other side of the bed, doing nothing in particular, which meant he was thinking about several things simultaneously. Dumbledore looked at the scene with the expression of someone who had adjusted their expectations considerably since last night and was still making adjustments. Harry, he said. Professor. Harry marked his page and looked up. Dumbledore pulled a chair and sat, not at the desk, not behind any barrier, just a chair in the open space between the beds, which was either wisdom or performance. Harry considered this and decided it was probably both, because Dumbledore was rarely entirely one thing. How are you feeling? Fine, Harry said. My hands are slightly cold. The contact with the fragment had a residual quality. It'll clear by tomorrow. Dumbledore looked at his hands. You expelled Voldemort's fragment from Professor Quirrell, he said. Without losing the host. That is, I don't know of anyone who has done that. I suspect most people who've tried have done it differently, Harry said. Violently. The contact was the key, direct magical contact rather than a banishing spell. The fragment can't survive that level of touch without losing its hold. He paused. The touch is lethal to it because my magic is the thing that defeated him the first time. It's antithetical to what he is. His nature and mine are incompatible. And the stone, Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his pocket and produced it. The small dark stone sat in his palm, catching light. Dumbledore looked at it with an expression that was complicated in the way of someone looking at a thing they'd used as a tool and were now reconsidering. Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. He should know his stone is intact. He should probably also know that he may want to consider what he wants done with it, now that it's been the target of someone trying to use it for a purpose it wasn't made for. He held it out. It's not mine. It never was. Dumbledore took the stone. You could have kept it. I know. I didn't want it. Harry held his gaze. I'm not interested in immortality. I know enough about it to understand the costs. A look passed between Dumbledore and Loki over Harry's head, brief, loaded, the look of two people who had each independently arrived at a similar understanding of what they were dealing with and were acknowledging this without wanting to make it ceremonial. There are things, Dumbledore said carefully, that I should have done differently. This year. He was looking at Harry. I placed you in a position that I had designed for a particular version of you. The version I expected. I know, Harry said. I'd like to do better, Dumbledore said. Going forward. I would like, he paused, choosing words with care that was genuine, not performative, to understand who you actually are. Rather than administering who I thought you would be. Harry studied him. The blue eyes, the long beard, the half-moon spectacles, the ancient face that held a century of very complicated decisions and hadn't quite stopped carrying any of them. He thought about what Loki had told him once, the most dangerous people are the ones who are right about the most important thing and wrong about the mechanism. You can't dismiss them and you can't follow them completely. You have to work alongside them very carefully. There are things I'll share with you, Harry said. About Voldemort. What he's done to himself, how he survived, what needs to happen to actually end him. He held Dumbledore's gaze. But I share them because I choose to. Because working together is more effective than working separately and I care about the outcome enough to prioritize effectiveness over independence. Not because I'm the headmaster, Dumbledore said. Not because of the title, no, Harry said. Because of the actual competence. Which is real. He paused. The title alone has never impressed me much. Loki made a small sound. He turned it into a cough. Nobody was convinced. Dumbledore sat with this for a moment. "What will you do?" he said. "This summer. The coming years." "Finish school," Harry said. "Learn what Hogwarts can teach me and find the rest elsewhere. Build the understanding of what Voldemort has done and what needs to be done to properly end it." He looked at the window, at the brightening morning. "I have time. He's diminished right now. A year, maybe 2, before he finds another way back to a body. I intend to use the time well." "And the prophecy," Dumbledore said. "The prophecy describes a convergence," Harry said. "A point at which two things that are fundamentally opposed must resolve that opposition. It doesn't describe a script." He looked back at Dumbledore. "I'm not afraid of it. I'm not running from it. But I refuse to let it turn into a predetermined ending before I've had a chance to understand all the variables." He held the old man's gaze. "Give me the time to work with those variables and I'll give you a better outcome than your original plan was heading for." Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The hospital wing held its morning peace. Fawkes, who had apparently followed the headmaster and was now perched on the windowsill, made a sound that was not quite a trill and not quite a word but was clearly an endorsement. "All right," Dumbledore said. "Not capitulation, agreement. Different thing." "All right, Harry." Ron and Hermione arrived together at 10, which was probably a coincidence of timing and was probably not. Ron had the bruise on prominent display and a bag of food from the kitchens and the easy confidence of someone who had been through something significant and had come out on the right side of it and was now treating the aftermath as logistics. Hermione had a notebook. "You look fine," Ron said, looking at Harry. "I am fine." "Good." He sat down heavily in the chair Dumbledore had vacated. "Right. So. Last night." He looked at Loki. "Loki. Which is actually your name?" "You're actually," he made a gesture encompassing the concept. "Yes," Loki said. "And that was actually Hela." "Last night." "Yes." Ron nodded slowly. "Okay. I'm adjusting to this." He opened the food bag. "Adjusting goes better with breakfast." Hermione sat on the edge of the nearest empty bed with her notebook open and looked at Harry with the expression she wore when she had significant information to organize and had been waiting for the appropriate moment. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the anchors. The soul pieces." She looked at the notebook. "I found something in the restricted section in February that I didn't know how to contextualize at the time. I think I know now." Harry leaned forward. "Tell me." "Objects," she said. "Dark objects of significant power, things that carry a specific kind of magical corruption that isn't just residual dark magic but something more deliberate, more structural. Like the magic was put into the object rather than just used to enchant it." She looked up. "The diary that was found at the Malfoy estate in 1979. Taken by ministry officials and then mysteriously returned. It matches a description in a book I found, a very old book, restricted, half the pages spelled against being read. I had to. How did you read it?" Loki said, with genuine professional curiosity. Hermione looked at him. "A counter-reading charm I extrapolated from a passage in Agrippa's occult philosophy, cross-referenced with a binding nullification technique from a text that wasn't supposed to be in the restricted section at all." She looked faintly guilty and entirely unsurprised at herself. "I should probably not have been in the restricted section." "You should definitely have been in the restricted section," Loki said. "This is exactly the right use of a restricted section." Neville, who had come in quietly behind Ron and Hermione and settled on the windowsill near Fawkes, looked between Loki and Hermione with the expression he wore when he was following a conversation that was moving slightly faster than he'd expected. "What's a Horcrux?" he said. Everyone looked at him. He blinked. "I read the same book," he said, slightly defensive. "In November. When I was doing the section on dark magical artifacts for the extra credit assignment in History of Magic." He looked at his hands. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I thought it was historical. It's not historical, Harry said. He looked at Hermione. How many? The number that would make him as difficult to kill as you described, she said, is more than one. The theory doesn't specify, but the structural magic implies multiple. Each one a piece of his soul, stored in a vessel. She held his gaze. Each one would need to be found and destroyed before he could be properly ended. The hospital wing was quiet. Quirrell breathed his shallow, damaged breaths. Outside, the Scottish morning had arrived fully, the grey committed to becoming something cleaner. Right, Ron said, into the silence, with the specific equanimity of someone who had decided that the scope of a problem was not a reason to put down the food he was eating. So we have a project. Harry looked at him. A project. For, I don't know, several years presumably. Given we're 11. He ate a piece of toast. That's fine. I've got time. Hermione looked at her notebook and then at Harry. There are things we'll need. Information we don't have yet. Research I'll need to do in places, she glanced at Loki, that presumably go beyond the Hogwarts restricted section. Yes, Harry said. I'll need access. Yes, Harry said. To significantly more than a school library. The library in hell, Loki said, is comprehensive. He looked at Hermione with the expression he reserved for people he was genuinely interested in. I suspect you'd find it productive. Hermione's expression at the words library in hell was the expression of someone receiving extraordinary news and doing their level best to respond proportionately. She succeeded, mostly. That would be, yes, she said. I'd like that. Neville looked at the window. I'll help, he said quietly. However I can. I know I'm not the most, he stopped. Started again. I want to help. Harry looked at him. Good, he said. We'll need someone who understands plants that can break objects. He met Neville's eyes. Several of the vessels will probably be warded by living things. Devil's Snare was first year. The later wards will be worse. He held Neville's gaze steady and clear. I need someone who can work with things that grow and guard. Neville straightened. Not dramatically, just the small adjustment of someone finding where they fit and discovering the fit is real. Okay, he said. Summer came in the way that Hogwarts summers came, not all at once but building, the light lasting longer each day, the ground softening, the lake going from iron to something closer to silver. Exams arrived and passed, and Harry sat them with the specific efficiency of someone for whom the material had been mostly familiar already and the remaining gaps had been filled in 8 months of deliberate study. He didn't race through them and he didn't overthink them. He answered what was asked correctly and left when he was done and went to find his friends. The last night before the train was warm and clear, and a group of Gryffindors colonized the grounds by the lake, and someone had acquired a quantity of butterbeer from somewhere and no one was asking questions about the source. The castle stood above them with its windows lit, 1,000 years of accumulated presence comfortable in the long summer dark, and the lake held the sky's reflection in pieces. Harry sat with his back against a tree, Nix on his knee, watching his friends. Ron and the twins, Fred and George Weasley, who had become, over the course of the year, a specific kind of constant disruption that Harry had found he genuinely loved, not despite the chaos but partly because of it, were doing something with a pair of dumb bombs that was clearly going to produce a result. Hermione was half reading and half talking to Neville, who had grown several inches since September and whose quiet confidence had grown with him, incremental and solid. Ginny Weasley, Ron's younger sister, who had been around since Christmas and had graduated from shy silent to occasionally fierce with a speed that Harry respected. Loki was here, which was not expected and was exactly what it was, Loki doing what Loki did, appearing where things were interesting. He was sitting slightly apart, talking to Percy Weasley, who was the sort of person you would not predict Loki would find interesting and who had therefore become specifically interesting to Loki, because Percy's rigid adherence to structure and rule came from a genuine place and that genuine place was the thing Loki was currently poking at with focused attention. Percy looked like he'd had several thoughts he hadn't previously had and was deciding how he felt about them. Hela was not here. She'd gone back to Hell 3 days after the night in the corridor, with the promise of summer. Harry had walked her to the edge of the wards where she could open a passage, and they'd stood there in the May morning without particular ceremony. "You did well," she said. "I know," he said, and she'd smiled, the real one, not the corner of the mouth, the actual one, which was rare and complete and lit up the half of her face that was made of light. "Come home when the term ends," she said. "There's more for you to learn. And I want to show you something in the archive." "About the anchors?" "About the magic your mother used," she said. "The night she chose to die for you. I have the record of it." She looked at him with the even, clear attention of centuries of witnessing. "It is more extraordinary than anyone has understood. Even you." He'd held that all of May, turning it over. His mother's choice, its mechanism, its implications. The thing he'd been closest to his whole life and understood least completely. Now he sat by the lake and thought about it and watched his friends and felt the particular fullness of a year that had been worth all of it, the discovery and the danger and the moments that had exceeded everything he'd prepared for and the moments that had come in exactly under the preparation and fit. Ron broke away from the Dumbledore enterprise and dropped into the grass beside him. "Last night," he said. "Last night," Harry agreed. "You're going home for the summer?" "Yes. For part of it. I'll come visit." Ron's face at this was extremely unguarded, the specific pleasure of someone who hadn't quite believed the friendship was real until they received evidence of its continuity. "Yeah. Obviously." Harry looked at him. "Your mum will feed me." "She'll feed you until you stop being able to move," Ron confirmed happily. "Perfect." Hermione came and sat on Harry's other side, closing her book with the deliberate finality of someone done with study for a season. She looked at the lake for a moment. "Next year," she said. "Next year," Harry said. "The chamber," Neville said, sitting nearby. He'd been listening. "I read something about it. In passing." Hermione looked at him sharply. "Where?" "Hogwarts, a history," Neville said. "There's a mention of a sealed chamber that was never opened after the original Founders period. I didn't know it was relevant until, I think it might be." Harry looked at him. "Where exactly?" "I'll show you the passage on the train tomorrow," Neville said. "I wrote down the page." Of course he did, Harry thought. Of course he did. He looked at the three of them, Ron arguing with Fred at the far end, Neville organized and present, Hermione already calculating. "Good," he said. They watched the lake hold its silver reflection, and the castle stood above them old and certain, and somewhere in the dark of the grounds fog circled once, a moving flame, before rising above the tree line and vanishing. Loki appeared beside Harry without any transition that Harry had observed, which was still occasionally impressive even after 11 years of exposure. He handed Harry a cup of something warm and sat down in the grass without evident regard for his coat. "Percy Weasley," he said, "is going to have a crisis of ideology in approximately 4 years that will hurt him considerably and make him considerably better. The signs are all there." "I know," Harry said. "I've been watching." "Of course you have." Loki was quiet for a moment, looking at the lake. "Your mother's magic," he said. "The thing Hela wants to show you." "Yes. I know what it is," he said. "I've known since the night in Godric's Hollow. Since the moment I touched your magic for the first time and felt what was inside it." He looked at Harry with the expression that had no performance in it at all, the face that Harry had seen in very specific moments across his whole life, the campfire in Morocco, the cottage in Ireland, the morning after Quirrell. "It is the most extraordinary thing I have ever encountered. And I have encountered more things than you can currently imagine." Harry waited. "She gave you everything," Loki said. "Not just her love, not just her life, her magic. The entirety of it. Voluntarily, completely, without holding any of it back. The sacrifice wasn't just physical. It was total. He looked at the lake. The magic that's in you is not only yours. It's yours and hers together. The green fire, that's hers. Mixed into you so completely that there's no separating them. He paused. That's why you are what you are. Not the prophecy. Not the killing curse rebounding. Her. She made you into something new. Harry was quiet. The lake held the night's light in its silver surface. Nyx moved on his knee, tucked her head against him. I know, Harry said, after a while. You knew. Not in those words. But I could feel it, the fire never felt entirely mine. It always felt like company. He paused. Like she was still in it. Keeping me warm. Loki said nothing. He was looking at the lake and his face was doing everything it did when it was managing things, and for once Harry didn't pretend not to see it. Thank you, Harry said. Loki looked at him. For what, specifically? For October 31st, 1981, Harry said. For not leaving me there. He held his brother's gaze, because that was what he was, had been from the first morning in the Irish cottage when Harry had understood the word in its full weight, not family by blood but something more deliberately chosen and therefore more real. For all of it. Loki held the look for a moment. Then he did what Loki did, he said something that was not what he was feeling and was simultaneously more honest than anything else he could have said. You would have been insufferable in someone else's hands, he said. I was protecting the world. Obviously, Harry said. They sat by the dark lake with the castle above them and the summer coming in on the warm air and the sound of his friends behind him, and Harry thought about Voldemort's anchors scattered through the world, and the Chamber of Secrets that Neville had read about, and his mother's fire in his chest, and the year ahead that would be harder than this one, and the one after that harder still, and somewhere at the end of all of it a confrontation that the prophecy described as inevitable. He wasn't afraid. He had been to hell. He had expelled a fragment of the darkest wizard in a century from a host body at 11 years old. He had stood in front of a mirror that showed people their deepest desires and seen himself, whole, and understood that he already had what he needed. He had Loki's wit and Hela's understanding of death and his mother's fire and his father's nerve and 3 friends who had chosen him when they didn't have to and a castle full of old magic that pulsed under his hand like a heartbeat and a thestral hair wand that had been waiting 40 years and a stone that could summon the dead and a cloak that could hide the living. He was 11 years old and he was the god of Mischief's brother and Hela's charge and Lily Potter's son and Harry, just Harry, exactly himself, and that was more than enough. The summer was coming. The war was eventually coming. He would be ready for both, and for everything between them, and he looked forward to every single piece of it. Tomorrow, he said, to Loki, to the lake, to the night and the castle and all of it. Tomorrow, Loki agreed. The fire in Harry's chest burned warm and green and steady, and above them all the castle stood, and the stars came out one by one over Scotland, and the year ended quietly, the way good things sometimes did, not with a declaration, but with a breath, and the certain knowledge that everything worth doing was still ahead.